3 years after my wife died, my lawyer called me and said, "Sir, I found a secret letter in Viola's safe deposit box. Come immediately, and do not tell your sons." What she warned me about changed everything. As I sat in the leather chair of my lawyer's office, holding a piece of paper that smelled like lavender and betrayal, I realized the woman I had slept next to for 40 years had died terrified of the people eating at my dinner table. Before I continue this story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to stand up to family who underestimated your worth. The rain was hammering against the window of Franklin Vance's office on the 42nd floor of the Dominion Tower, creating a gray curtain that matched the storm brewing in my gut. Franklin has been my attorney for 30 years, the only man in this city besides me who knows that Otis Jenkins, the retired truck driver in the flannel shirt and work boots, is actually the sole owner of Jenkins Logistics, a $50 million empire I built from a single, beat-up rig. Franklin didn't offer me a drink, which is how I knew it was bad. He just slid a heavy, cream-colored envelope across the mahogany desk, his hand shaking slightly. "Otis," he said, his voice low and gravelly. "Viola left this with me 6 months before she passed. She gave me strict instructions. She said, if she died of natural causes, I was to burn it. But if she died under suspicious circumstances, or if I ever felt you were in danger, I was to give it to you." I stared at the envelope, my name written in her elegant curling script, the ink slightly faded. It had been 3 years since we buried her. 3 years since the police told me she had slipped on the hardwood stairs in her socks and broken her neck. 3 years of living in a house that felt too big and too quiet, without her humming gospel tunes in the kitchen. I opened the envelope, my calloused fingers struggling with the seal. Inside was a single sheet of paper dated 2 weeks before her death. "Otis, if you are reading this, it means I am gone. And it wasn't an accident. My heart slammed against my ribs, a physical blow that took my breath away." I read on, the letters blurring as my eyes filled with tears. "I have discovered something terrible about Marcus and that woman he married. They think I am just a confused old lady, but I have been watching them check safe deposit box number 404 at the First National Bank. The key is taped behind the old family photo in the hallway, the one where Marcus is graduating kindergarten. Do not trust our son, Otis. And whatever you do, run from his wife. She is not who she says she is. She is dangerous. Please, protect yourself." I sat there, frozen, the silence of the office deafening. Safe deposit box 404. Murder. Betrayal. It didn't make sense. Marcus was my boy, my flesh and blood. Yes, he was weak. Yes, he had never held down a job for more than a year. Yes, he was always asking for money. But a killer. And Tiffany, my daughter-in-law, the woman who brought me casseroles and called me dad. Franklin watched me, his eyes full of pity. I verified the signature, Otis. It is hers. And I did some digging of my own. After she passed, the autopsy report noted bruising on her wrists that was consistent with a struggle, not a fall. But the medical examiner ruled it accidental, because there was no other evidence. "Why didn't you tell me sooner?" I whispered, my voice cracking. "Because I didn't have the letter until this morning," Franklin admitted. "Viola hid it in a file for a property trust that wasn't set to open until 3 years after her death. She was protecting you, Otis. She knew if you saw this, while you were grieving, you might do something rash. She wanted you to have a clear head." "A clear head," I laughed, a bitter, dry sound. There was nothing clear about this. My wife had been murdered in my own home, and I had been living with her killers for 3 years, eating the food they cooked, sleeping down the hall from them letting them drive my car. I stood up the paper, crushed in my fist. "I need to go to the bank," I said. "The bank is closed," Otis Franklin said, checking his watch. "It is 6 p.m. Go home. Act normal. Do not let them know you know anything. We will go to the bank first thing in the morning. Act normal. Act normal while looking at the man who might have pushed his mother down the stairs. Act normal while listening to the woman who might have orchestrated the death of the only woman I ever loved." I walked out of the building and into the pouring rain, ignoring the valet who offered me an umbrella. I climbed into my 1978 Ford F-150, the truck I refused to trade in because it reminded me of where I came from. The engine roared to life, a comforting mechanical growl that usually settled my nerves, but tonight, even the truck felt different. It felt like a getaway vehicle. I drove home through the slick streets of Chicago, my mind replaying the night Viola died. I had been at the warehouse, overseeing a late shipment, just like they knew I would be. I came home to find Marcus crying in the hallway, and Tiffany on the phone with 911, screaming about an accident. I had believed them. I had hugged my son while he sobbed on my shoulder, telling him it was going to be all right. I had let Tiffany make the funeral arrangements, thanking her for being so strong for us. I was a fool, a blind, sentimental old fool. I pulled into the driveway of the house in Hyde Park, the house I bought with cash 20 years ago, the house that was supposed to be our sanctuary. The lights were on, blazing from every window, which was strange. Usually Marcus and Tiffany kept the lights low to save electricity, or so they said. I walked up the front steps, the rain soaking through my flannel shirt, chilling me to the bone. I unlocked the front door and stepped inside, expecting silence, expecting the usual evening routine of Marcus watching sports and Tiffany scrolling on her phone. Instead, I heard the sound of destruction. A loud crashing noise came from the back of the house, followed by the high-pitched whine of a power saw. Dust was floating in the air, coating the family photos on the wall in a fine gray powder. "What in the hell?" I muttered, dropping my keys on the table. I walked down the hallway toward my office, the room where I kept my ledgers, the room where I ran my empire in secret, the room Viola used to sit in while I worked, reading her books. The door to the office was gone, ripped off its hinges and leaning against the wall. Inside the room was chaos. Two men in coveralls were tearing up the carpet, ripping out the built-in bookshelves that I had installed with my own hands. Books were piled in a heap in the corner, treated like trash. Marcus was standing in the middle of the room, holding a blueprint, and Tiffany was directing the workmen, pointing at the wall where my desk used to be. "No, no," she was shouting. "I want the mirrors on that wall, and the bar needs to be at waist height." "What are you doing?" I roared, my voice booming over the sound of the saw. The saw stopped. Silence fell over the room like a heavy blanket. Marcus jumped, spinning around to face me, his eyes wide with surprise and something else. Fear. Guilt. "Dad," he stammered. "We didn't think you would be home so soon." Tiffany recovered faster. She smoothed her white dress and stepped over a pile of debris, looking at me with that expression of condescending patience she reserved for children and the elderly. "We are renovating Otis," she said, as if that explained why they were destroying my sanctuary. "We talked about this, remember?" "We never talked about this," I said, stepping into the room, my boots crunching on the broken wood of my bookshelves. "Get these men out of here, now." "Oh, don't be dramatic, Otis," Tiffany sighed, waving a hand dismissively. "We need this space. Marcus and I are stressed. We need a place to center ourselves. I am turning this dusty old room into a yoga studio. It is going to be good for the energy of the house." "Yoga studio? You are tearing apart my office for a yoga studio." "It is not your office anymore, Dad," Marcus said, stepping forward, trying to look authoritative but failing. His eyes kept darting to the floor. "You are retired, remember? You don't need an office. You just sit in here and stare at the wall. It is depressing." "I don't stare at the wall. I run a business," I wanted to scream. "I run a company that employs 400 people and pays for the clothes on your back and the food in your stomach." But I couldn't say it. Not yet. I had to remember the letter, verify the box, keep the secret. "This is my house," I said, my voice low and dangerous, "and I did not give you permission to touch this room." "Technically, it is our house," Tiffany interjected, her voice sharp, stripping away the veneer of kindness. "Dad, you signed the deed over to us last year, remember? For tax purposes?" I felt the blood drain from my face. I remembered the papers they had brought me shortly after Viola died. Piles of legal documents. They said were to help manage the estate taxes I had been grieving. I had been in a fog. I had trusted them. "You tricked me," I whispered. "We helped you," Tiffany corrected, stepping closer, her perfume cloying and sweet, masking the smell of the sawdust. "You are getting older, Otis. You are forgetting things like how you agreed to this renovation last week." "I never agreed to this." "See, Marcus," she said, turning to my son. "See how confused he is? It is getting worse. We really need to think about that assisted living facility on the north side. They have memory care units." "Memory care?" I looked at them, looking at the smirk on Tiffany's face and the weak, avoidant eyes of my son. They weren't just taking my room, they were gaslighting me. They were setting the stage to declare me incompetent, just like Viola warned. "Get out," I said, pointing to the door. Not to the workmen, but to my family. "Dad, be reasonable," Marcus pleaded. I said, "Get out of this room," I shouted, grabbing a hammer that was lying on a sawhorse and gripping it until my knuckles turned white. "Put everything back the way it was, or so help me God, I will tear this house down around your ears." The workmen didn't need to be told twice. They grabbed their tools and scrambled out of the room, leaving a trail of dust. Marcus looked at the hammer in my hand, then at my face, and he saw something there that made him step back. He saw the man who used to haul steel across the country, not the tired old father he thought he could bully. "Fine," Marcus muttered, backing away. "We will talk about this later, when you have calmed down." He grabbed Tiffany's arm and pulled her out of the room. She glared at me over her shoulder, her eyes cold and calculating. "You are a crazy old man, Otis," she hissed. "You are going to hurt yourself one of these days, and we won't be here to pick you up." They left, leaving me standing in the ruins of my office, the rain beating against the window pane like a drum. I dropped the hammer and walked over to the pile of books I picked up. A copy of Viola's favorite Bible, the cover covered in drywall dust. I wiped it off with my sleeve, my hands shaking, not from age but from rage. I looked at the wall where the safe was hidden behind a false panel. The workmen hadn't reached it yet, thank God. Inside that safe was the ledger, the proof of my wealth, the proof that I wasn't just a retired driver. I touched the pocket of my shirt, feeling the letter against my chest. "Don't trust our son," Viola had written. I looked at the empty doorway where Marcus had just stood, the son I had raised, the son I had loved, the son who had just watched his wife call me crazy while they destroyed my life. I didn't trust him anymore. And as I stood there in the dust and the shadows, I made a promise to my dead wife. I wasn't going to that memory care unit, and I wasn't going to let them take this house. I was going to find out what was in box 404, and then I was going to bring the whole world crashing down on their heads. They wanted a war. Well, they just declared one on the wrong man. I reached into my pocket and pulled out my flip phone, the old one I kept for emergencies. I dialed a number I hadn't used in years, a number that belonged to a man named Tiny, who used to run security for my trucks, a man who owed me his life. "Tiny," I said when he answered, his voice rough with sleep. "It is Otis. I need a favor. I need you to watch my house, and I need you to find out everything there is to know about a woman named Tiffany Miller." I hung up and sat down on the floor amidst the wreckage of my life, waiting for the morning, waiting for the bank to open, waiting for the truth to finally set me free or kill me. The yoga studio was just the beginning. They didn't know it yet, but they had just broken the seal on their own destruction. The smell of natural gas is unmistakable. It smells like rotten eggs and danger, and it hit me the moment I walked into the kitchen the next morning. I had barely slept, my mind racing from the destruction of my office and the letter burning a hole in my pocket. I had come down to make coffee, black and strong, the way I had for 50 years, but the air was thick and heavy with fumes. I froze my hand halfway to the stove dial, looking at it. The knob was turned all the way to the right, hissing softly, pumping explosive gas into the home I had built with my own sweat and blood. I reached out to turn it off, my heart hammering against my ribs, knowing with absolute certainty that I had not touched that stove. I had eaten a cold ham sandwich for dinner, standing over the sink. I hadn't even boiled water. Before my fingers could touch the dial, the kitchen door burst open behind me. "Dad, what are you doing?" Marcus screamed, his voice shrill with a panic that sounded rehearsed. I spun around, just as Tiffany came rushing in behind him, holding a handkerchief to her nose, her eyes wide with fake terror. "Oh my God, he is trying to kill us," she shrieked. "He left the gas on again. Marcus, I told you, he isn't safe." "I didn't leave anything on," I said, my voice rough from lack of sleep. "I haven't used the stove in 24 hours. "Liar," Tiffany spat, stepping closer, her face twisted in disgust. "Look at it, Otis. Look at the dial. It is wide open. You probably forgot, just like you forgot to lock the front door yesterday. Just like you forgot where you put your keys. You are losing it, old man, and you are going to blow us all up." I looked at Marcus, expecting him to defend me, expecting him to use his brain, and realized that his father, who had driven hazardous materials across 3 state lines for a decade without a single safety violation, would not leave a stove running. But Marcus wouldn't meet my eyes. He was looking at the floor, his hands clenching and unclenching at his sides. "Dad," he said, his voice quiet, guilty. "You are getting forgetful. We have noticed it for a while now. The confused looks, the wandering. Maybe you did turn it on and just forgot." I felt a cold chill that had nothing to do with the morning air. They were gaslighting me, literally and figuratively. They were rewriting my reality, trying to make me doubt my own mind. "I am not senile, Marcus," I said, stepping forward, my voice rising. "I am as sharp as I ever was, and I know for a fact that this woman—" "Don't you dare come near me," Tiffany screamed, cutting me off, backing away as if I were a monster with a knife. "Marcus, get him away from me. He is aggressive. Look at his eyes. He is having an episode." Marcus stepped between us, his face hardening, the weak boy vanishing, replaced by something desperate and dangerous. "Back off, Dad," he said, putting his hands on my chest. I looked at his hands, the hands I had held when they were tiny and soft, the hands I had taught to throw a baseball, the hands I had greased with oil when I taught him. To fix an engine, those hands were now pushing me, pushing his father. "Son," I said warningly, "get your hands off me." "No," Marcus shouted, and then he shoved me. It wasn't a gentle push. It was a hard, violent shove meant to hurt, meant to dominate. I stumbled backward, my boots catching on the linoleum rug by the sink, my arms flailing for purchase, but finding only air. I hit the floor hard, my hip taking the brunt of the impact. A sharp, white, hot pain shooting up my spine, stealing the breath from my lungs. I lay there for a second, stunned, staring up at the ceiling, at the water stain shaped like a cloud that Viola used to say looked like an angel. My own son had put his hands on me in anger. My own son had knocked me down. I struggled to sit up, gasping through the pain in my hip, looking up at them. Marcus looked shocked for a second, looking at his own palms as if they had betrayed him. But then Tiffany stepped up beside him, her hand on his shoulder, whispering something in his ear, and his face closed, off again, hardening into stone. "See," she said loud enough for me to hear, "he can't even stand up on his own. He is frail. He is a danger to himself and others. We have to do it, Marcus. We have to do it now." Marcus nodded, swallowing hard. "You leave us no choice, Dad," he said, his voice trembling slightly, not with regret, but with the adrenaline of the act. "You can't live alone anymore. Look at you, lying on the floor, leaving the gas on. You are a hazard." "I am fine," I gritted out, grabbing the handle of the oven to pull myself up, my joints screaming in protest. "I just slipped because you pushed me." "You fell," Tiffany corrected him instantly, rewriting history before the ink was dry. "You fell because you are old and clumsy, and because your brain is turning to mush." She turned and marched out of the kitchen, her heels clicking on the hardwood with a military cadence. Moments later, I heard the front door open, and then the sound of the closet in the hallway being thrown open. "What is she doing?" I asked Marcus, who was still standing over me like a prison guard. "She is doing what needs to be done, Dad," he said, avoiding my gaze. I finally managed to stand, leaning heavily against the counter, waiting for the world to stop spinning. I limped into the hallway, just in time to see Tiffany coming out of my bedroom. My bedroom, the room I had shared with Viola for 40 years. She had an armful of my clothes, my flannel shirts, my work pants, the Sunday suit I had worn to my wife's funeral. "What are you doing?" I roared, finding my voice. She didn't answer. She walked straight to the front door and through them. She threw my life out onto the wet grass of the front lawn, my shirts fluttering like wounded birds before hitting the mud. "Get them out!" she screamed, grabbing another pile from the hallway table. "My hat, my coat, my boots. Get all this junk out of here." "Stop it!" I shouted, moving toward her, but my hip gave way and I had to grab the wall to stay upright. Marcus grabbed my arm, holding me back. "Let her do it, Dad," he said, his grip tight, bruising it. "Is for the best." Tiffany came back in, dusting her hands off, as if she had just taken out the trash. She looked at me, her eyes gleaming with a malicious triumph. "We are moving in, Otis," she announced, her voice flat and final. "What?" I whispered. "We are moving into the master bedroom," she said. "We can't trust you to be alone in this house anymore. You obviously can't handle the stairs, and you can't handle the kitchen. So Marcus and I are taking the master suite, so we can keep an eye on you, 24/7. You can sleep in the guest room downstairs, the small one off the kitchen. It is better for you anyway, no stairs to fall down." "You are kicking me out of my own bed?" I asked, disbelief washing over me. "We are caring for you," Marcus said, parroting her words, but the hollow ring in his voice told me he knew exactly what this was. It was a coup. It was a hostile takeover. "We are going to live here full time," Tiffany continued, walking past me into the kitchen, opening the fridge, and starting to throw away my food, my jars of pickles, my leftovers, my insulin. "We need to clear this junk out too," she said, tossing a jar of mayonnaise into the trash can. "We need room for our organic produce. If we are going to live here, we are going to eat properly, not this processed garbage that is rotting your brain." I watched her throw away the peach cobbler Mrs. Gable had made for me, and I felt a surge of rage so powerful my vision blurred. I wanted to grab her. I wanted to throw her out the door after my clothes. I wanted to tell Marcus that I had millions in the bank, that I owned the company he worked for, that I could buy and sell them both 1,000 times over. I opened my mouth to scream, to tell them to get the hell out of my house, to tell them I wasn't a helpless old man. But then I felt the crinkle of the paper in my shirt pocket. The letter, "Don't trust our son," Viola had written. "Run from his wife. She is dangerous." If I fought back now, if I showed my strength, if I revealed my hand, what would they do? They had already staged a gas leak. They had already physically assaulted me. If I proved I was competent, if I proved I was strong, they wouldn't just kick me out of my room. They might finish what they started with the gas. They might find a way to make sure I had a real accident, a fatal one. Or worse, they would use my anger as proof of my insanity. They would call the police right now, tell them I was violent, tell them I was attacking them, and with the stage they had set with the gas and the confusion, who would the cops believe? The young professional couple, or the angry black man shouting in his kitchen? I had to be smart. I had to be Viola's husband, not just a truck driver. I had to play the part. I let my shoulders slump. I let the fire die out of my eyes. I let my mouth hang open slightly. I forced my hands to tremble visibly. I looked at Marcus, and I let a tear leak out of my eye. A tear of genuine pain, but used for a performance. "Son," I whispered, my voice quavering, "please don't take my room." Viola's smell is still in the pillows. Marcus flinched, looking away, his face twisting with a flash of guilt. But Tiffany stepped between us, blocking his view of my weakness, blocking his conscience. "It is for your own good, Otis," she said, her voice dripping with fake sympathy like syrup over poison. "You need constant supervision, and we are willing to sacrifice our privacy to give it to you. You should be grateful." She turned to Marcus, putting a hand on his chest. "Go get his things from the yard, honey," she said, sweet and commanding. "Put them in the guest room, and then call the movers. We need to get our furniture in here by tonight." Marcus nodded robotically and went out the front door into the rain to pick up the clothes his wife had thrown in the dirt. Tiffany watched him go, then she turned back to me, the sweet smile vanishing instantly, replaced by a sneer of pure contempt. She stepped close to me, invading my personal space, smelling of expensive perfume and rot. "Listen to me, old man," she whispered, and her voice was a hiss like a snake in dry grass. "You are going to be a good little boy. You are going to stay in that guest room, and you are going to do what you are told. If you cause any trouble, if you try to leave the house without permission, if you try to call anyone, I will tell the doctors that you tried to attack me. I will tell them you are a sexual deviant. I will tell them whatever I need to tell them to get you locked up in the state ward." She leaned in closer, her lips brushing my ear. "Just a few more months," she whispered, and I felt the cold radiating off her. "Just a few more months, and we will have enough on you to put you in that nursing home for good. And then this house, and everything in it, will be mine." She pulled back, winking at me, a grotesque parody of friendliness. "Now go to your room, Otis. Go lie down before you hurt yourself again." I stood there for a moment, letting the humiliation wash over me, letting the pain in my hip throb. Looked at this woman, this intruder, this enemy. I lowered my head, feigning defeat. "Yes, ma'am," I mumbled, shuffling my feet, dragging my bad leg a little more than necessary. I turned and walked slowly toward the small guest room off the kitchen, the room that used to be a pantry, the room with the small window that looked out onto the alley. I went inside and closed the door. I sat on the narrow twin bed, the springs creaking under my weight. I heard them outside, heard Marcus coming back in, wet and breathless, heard Tiffany issuing orders, heard the sounds of them taking over my sanctuary. I reached into my pocket and pulled out the letter, pressing it to my lips. "I am not weak, Viola," I whispered to the empty room. "I am just waiting." I lay back on the bed, staring at the ceiling, listening to the enemies celebrating their victory. Let them think they won. Let them think I am broken. Let them think I am a senile old fool, because a fool is invisible, and an invisible man can see everything. I closed the bed, my eyes, and began to plan. They had moved into my house, but they had just moved into a trap they didn't even know existed. And when the steel jaws finally snapped shut, I was going to be the one smiling. Life in the guest room was a slow suffocation. The walls were painted a dull beige that reminded me of the waiting room in a state hospital, and the single window looked out onto the brick wall of the neighbor's garage, leaving the room in a perpetual twilight that messed with your sense of time, which I suppose was exactly what they wanted. I spent my days sitting on the edge of the lumpy twin mattress, listening to the sounds of my house being colonized. I heard the heavy tread of Marcus's boots on the hardwood floors I had laid myself. I heard the high click of Tiffany's heels as she paced the hallway, talking on her phone, planning renovations, planning parties, planning a future that was built on my grave. They treated me like a ghost, or perhaps more accurately, like a stray dog they had reluctantly agreed to feed. I was not allowed in the living room because Tiffany said my presence made her anxious. I was not allowed in the kitchen while she was cooking because she said I got in the way. So I waited in my cell until they called me for meals, shuffling out with my head down, playing the part of the broken old man they desperately wanted me to be. Breakfast was the worst part of the day. It was a ritual of humiliation that Tiffany seemed to enjoy, with a disturbing intensity. She would set a plate of dry toast and watery oatmeal in front of me, the kind of food you give to someone who has lost their teeth and their dignity. And then she would bring out the bottle. It was a plastic bottle with a cheerful label that said, Senior Vitality Multivitamin. She would shake out 3 large yellow pills into her palm, her nails painted a blood red that clashed with the domestic scene she was trying to stage. "Time for your brain food, Otis," she would say, her voice pitching up into that syrupy tone she used when Marcus was in the room. "Come on now, we want to keep those synapses firing, don't we? We don't want you forgetting who we are." I would look at the pills lying in her hand, and every instinct in my body would scream danger. I had driven trucks for 40 years. I knew how to read a manifest. I knew how to spot a bad load, and everything about this situation smelled wrong. The label looked cheap, like something printed on a home computer, and the pills themselves had no markings, no numbers, nothing to identify them, just smooth yellow ovals of mystery. But I knew I had to take them, or at least appear to take them. If I refused, she would make a scene. She would call Marcus. She would tell him I was being difficult, that I was refusing care, that I was paranoid. It would just be another checkmark on the list of symptoms they were compiling to have me committed. So I played the game. I would pick up the pills with a trembling hand, letting one drop to the table just to reinforce my clumsiness before picking it up again. I would put them in my mouth, feeling the chalky coating against my tongue, and then I would take a big gulp of water. "Good boy," Tiffany would coo, patting me on the head like a retriever. "Make sure you swallow them all down." I would swallow the water, but I would trap the pills under my tongue, holding them there in the pocket of flesh, fighting the gag reflex, fighting the urge to spit them into her face. I would open my mouth to show her it was empty, lifting my tongue just enough to hide the poison beneath. She would smile, satisfied with her control over me, and turn back to the counter to make her green smoothie. And the moment her back was turned, the moment the blender roared to life, masking any sound, I would bring my hand up to my mouth, cough into my napkin, and spit the pills out into the paper. It was a dangerous sleight of hand. If she caught me, the game would be over. But I had been handling cargo my whole life, and I knew how to move things without being seen. I would ball up the napkin and shove it deep into the pocket of my flannel shirt, my heart hammering against my ribs, a drumbeat of fear and adrenaline. I did this for 4 days, collecting the yellow pills. In a small plastic baggie I had hidden inside the hollow metal tube of the old curtain rod in the guest room. It was the only hiding place I was sure she wouldn't check. She was too busy looking for cash or deeds to worry about dusty window hardware. On the 5th day, I knew I had to get them tested. I couldn't just guess. I needed proof. I needed to know exactly what weapon they were using against me. I waited until the afternoon, when Tiffany usually took her nap. She claimed the stress of caring for me was exhausting her, though all she did was watch reality TV and order things online. Marcus was at work, or at least pretending to be at work at my company, probably shredding documents or stealing office supplies. I crept out of the guest room, the floorboards groaning under my socks. I made my way to the back door, the one off the kitchen that led to the alley where the garbage cans were kept. I opened it slowly, wincing as the hinges squeaked, but the house remained silent. I slipped out into the cold afternoon air, clutching the baggie of pills in my pocket. I walked down the alley to the corner where a gray sedan was waiting. It wasn't a taxi. It was a car belonging to Elias, a man I had known since basic training in Vietnam, a man who had become a pharmacist and who owed me a favor from 1968. I didn't get in the car. That would be too risky. If a neighbor saw me getting into a strange vehicle, it would get back to Tiffany. I just leaned against the window, as if I were a confused old man taking a breather, and Elias rolled down the glass. "You look like hell, Otis," Elias said, his eyes scanning my face, seeing the fatigue, seeing the weight loss. "I feel like hell," I whispered, reaching into my pocket and pulling out the baggie. I passed it to him quickly, palm to palm, like a drug deal in reverse. "What is this?" Elias asked, looking at the yellow pills. "They are telling me. They are vitamins," I said, "but I don't feel like they are vitamins. I feel like I am walking through fog. Even just holding them, tell me what they are. Elias, tell me what they are doing to me." "I will call you tonight," Elias said, pocketing the bag. He didn't ask questions. He didn't ask why I was whispering in an alley. He just started the engine and drove away, leaving me standing there in the cold, feeling more alone than I had ever felt in my life. I scurried back inside, locking the door behind me. Just minutes before, I heard Tiffany's footsteps on the stairs. Upstairs, I sat on my bed, my heart racing, waiting for the phone to ring, waiting for the verdict. It came at 8 p.m. I had hidden my burner phone, the one Tiffany didn't know about, inside the lining of my mattress. I felt it vibrate against my leg, and I waited until the house was quiet, until I heard the television blaring in the living room before I answered. "Otis." Elias's voice was tight, sharp with anger. "I am here, Elias. What is it?" "Those aren't vitamins, Otis," he said, and I could hear the rustling of papers in the background. "I ran a spectral analysis on them in the lab after hours. These are not over-the-counter supplements." "What are they?" I asked, my hand gripping the phone so tight I thought the plastic might crack. "It is haloperidol, Otis," he said. "Haldol. And a high dose, too. 5 milligrams per pill, and you gave me 10 pills. If you were taking 3 of these a morning, that is 15 milligrams a day. For a man your age with no history of psychosis, that is enough to turn your brain into pudding. Haldol." The word sounded like a heavy stone dropping into a well. "What does it do?" I whispered, though I think I already knew. "It is an antipsychotic," Elias explained, his voice trembling with rage. "It is used to treat schizophrenia or severe mania, but if you give it to a healthy person, especially an elderly person, it causes extreme lethargy, confusion, memory loss, tremors. It sedates you, Otis. It makes you pliable. It makes you look like you have dementia." I closed my eyes, letting the horror wash over me. They weren't just waiting for me to become incompetent. They were manufacturing the incompetence. They were chemically lobotomizing me, so they could drag me in front of a judge and say, look at him. He can't even speak clearly. Look at how his hands shake. Look at how he forgets where he is." They were poisoning me. They were murdering the man I was, leaving only a shell behind so they could pick the meat off my bones. "How long?" Elias asked. "How long have you been taking these?" "I haven't," I said. "I have been spitting them out." "Thank God," Elias breathed. "Thank God." "Otis, listen to me. You cannot stay there. This is attempted poisoning. This is a felony. You need to call the police. You need to get out." "I can't," I said, my voice flat. Not yet, Otis. They are trying to destroy your mind. I know, I said. I know. But if I leave now, they win. They get the house. They get the money. They get away with what they did to Viola. I need more. I need them to hang themselves completely. Otis, you are playing with fire. I am fire, I said, and then I hung up. I lay back on the bed, the darkness of the room pressing down on me. I thought about the pills, the yellow ovals of oblivion. I thought about Tiffany's smile as she handed them to me, the way she called it brain food, the sheer sadism of it. But then my mind went to Marcus, and the pain that hit me wasn't the sharp stab of betrayal. It was a dull, crushing weight that made it hard to breathe. My son knew. There was no way he didn't know. Tiffany might be the one handing me the pills, but Marcus was the one paying the bills. Marcus was the one who watched me swallow them. Marcus was the one who saw his father stumbling, who saw his father's hands shaking when I feigned the side effects and he did nothing. He watched me fade. He watched the light go out of my eyes, and he didn't stop it. I remembered teaching him to drive in the parking lot of the old stadium, his hands gripping the wheel, his eyes wide with fear and excitement. I remembered telling him that a man takes care of his responsibilities, that a man protects his family. I had failed. I had failed as a father, because I had raised a man who would stand by and watch his wife poison his own father, just so he wouldn't have to work for a living. I turned my face into the pillow and let out a sob, a single ragged sound of pure agony. He wasn't just greedy. He wasn't just weak. He was evil. He had looked at me, the man who wiped his tears and paid his tuition and bailed him out of every mistake he ever made, and he had decided that I was worth more to him as a vegetable than as a father. The grief was a physical thing, a hollow ache in my chest where my heart used to be. I wanted to hate him. I wanted to burn with rage. But in that moment, all I felt was a terrible, cold sorrow. My son was dead. The boy I loved was gone, replaced by this stranger who would drug an old man to steal his house. I wiped my eyes with the back of my hand, the rough skin scraping against my cheek. I sat up in the dark. They wanted a crazy old man. They wanted a confused, stumbling, drooling invalid. Fine, I would give them the performance of a lifetime. I would take their poison and I would spit it out. But I would act out every symptom Elias had described. I would shake. I would forget names. I would wander the halls at night screaming at ghosts. I would make them think their plan was working perfectly. I would let them get comfortable. I would let them get arrogant. I would let them think the old lion was toothless and dying. And then, when they reached for the crown, I would bite their hands off. I stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the brick wall, looking at nothing. The tears were gone now, replaced by a cold, hard resolve. "Goodbye, Marcus," I whispered to the night. "You made your choice and now you have to live with the consequences." I went back to bed and slept the sleep of the dead, preparing for the role I was born to play, the victim who was actually the executioner. I waited until the grandfather clock in the hallway chimed 2 in the afternoon, the time when Tiffany usually retreated to the master bedroom for what she called her beauty rest. But what I knew was actually hours of scrolling through social media and buying things she couldn't afford. I listened for the heavy thud of Marcus's boots leaving for the liquor store, a daily ritual he tried to hide, but failed because I knew the smell of cheap whiskey better than anyone. The house was silent, a heavy, suffocating silence that felt like a held breath. I slipped out of the guest room, my shoes in my hand, stepping carefully on the floorboards I knew would creak. I moved like a shadow in the home I had paid for, creeping toward the back door with the stealth of a man escaping a prison camp. The rain had stopped, leaving the streets of Chicago slick and gray, reflecting the steel of the sky. I didn't take my truck. They might hear the engine. Instead, I walked 3 blocks to the bus stop, pulling my collar, up against the wind, trying to look like just another old man with nowhere to go and nothing to do. The First National Bank was cool and quiet, smelling of floor wax and money. The teller didn't ask for ID. She knew me. She knew Viola. She gave me a sympathetic smile that told me she thought I was there to mourn, to touch the papers of a dead wife. But she didn't know I was there to dig up a grave. I walked into the vault, the heavy steel door closing behind me, sealing out the world, sealing me in with the truth. Box 4. 04 was at eye level. I inserted the key, my hand trembling, not from age, but from a fear so deep it settled in the marrow of my bones. I pulled the long metal box out and carried it to the private viewing room, setting it down on the table under the harsh fluorescent light. I stared at it for a long moment, afraid to open it, afraid of what Viola had left for me, afraid that once I lifted that lid, I could never go back to being the man I was yesterday. I took a breath. That rattled in my chest and flipped the latch. Inside, lying on top of a stack of bonds and deeds, was a small black leather book, Viola's diary, the one she wrote in every night, sitting in her favorite chair while I watched the news. Next to it was a silver USB drive, cold and modern against the worn leather. I picked up the diary. The leather was soft from her touch, and it still held the faint scent of her lavender hand cream, a scent that brought tears to my eyes and a lump to my throat. I opened it, the pages falling open to a bookmark, a red ribbon that marked a date, 6 months before she died, October 14th. The handwriting was shaky, not the elegant script I knew. It was the writing of a woman who was scared, who was writing quickly, writing in secret. I read the words, and my heart stopped beating. It happened again today, the entry began. Tiffany came over while Otis was at the depot. She was angry about money, always money. She said Marcus needed a loan for a business venture, but I know it is launch, for gambling debts. I told her no. I told her we had given them enough. I gripped the edge of the table, reading faster, the words blurring. She got in my face, screaming. She called me a selfish old witch. She said I was sitting on a pile of gold while they were starving. I tried to walk away. I tried to go up the stairs to get away from her hate, but she followed me. She grabbed my arm and spun me around. She shoved me, Otis. She shoved me hard against the banister. I gasped, the sound loud in the small room. Shoved her, my Viola, my gentle, sweet Viola, shoved by that monster. I almost fell. The diary continued. I bruised my hip, and my wrist hurts where she grabbed me. But the worst part was, Marcus. He was there. He saw it. He saw his wife put her hands on his mother, and he didn't do anything. He didn't scream. He didn't help me. He just stood there, looking at his shoes. And then, when I said I was going to call the police, he stopped me. He grabbed the phone from my hand and begged me not to. He said it was an accident, he said. Tiffany was just stressed. He said, if I called the police, it would ruin his life. He cried. Otis. He cried and begged his mother to protect the woman who hurt her. And I did. I protected him because I am a mother. And mothers are stupid creatures who love even when it kills them. I slammed the book shut, a roar building in my throat, a primal sound of rage and grief. Marcus had chosen her. He had chosen the abuser over the victim. He had watched his mother being assaulted, and his only concern was protecting his own skin. I picked up the USB drive, my fingers tightening around it until the edges bit into my skin. This was the voice. This was the proof. I plugged it into the small laptop I had brought with me, a device I kept hidden in my tool chest. I put on the headphones and clicked the single file on the drive. The audio was grainy, recorded on a phone hidden in a pocket, but the voices were unmistakable. It is $50,000, Marcus. Tiffany's voice hissed sharp and greedy. $50,000 sitting in that savings account. She never checks it. She is too busy baking cakes and reading her Bible. But what if Dad finds out? Marcus's voice. Whiny, weak, terrified. He won't find out. He trusts you. He thinks you are handling the taxes. Just transfer it. Transfer it today, Marcus. I want that ring. The one at Tiffany's. The 2-carat solitaire. You promised me. You promised me a lifestyle, Marcus. And I am tired of waiting for these old people to die. There was a pause. A silence filled with the scratching of static and the sound of my own heavy breathing. Fine, Marcus said, his voice defeated. A surrender that cost me $50,000. Fine, I will do it. But this is the last time. Tiff. It is never the last time, you idiot, Tiffany laughed. A cold, cruel sound. I took the headphones off, my hands shaking so hard I could barely close the laptop. $50,000, my retirement money, The money I had saved driving through blizzards and heat waves, sleeping in rest stops, eating out of cans so that my wife would be safe, so that my son would have a future. They had stolen it to buy a piece of glass, to put on the finger of the woman who had shoved my wife against a banister. I remembered the ring. I remembered seeing it on Tiffany's hand, a flashy, gaudy thing she claimed was a family heirloom from her grandmother. She had flaunted it at Sunday dinner, waving her hand around while Viola sat there nursing a bruised wrist and a broken heart. They had sat at my table, eaten my food, and laughed in my face while wearing the evidence of their theft. I sat back in the chair, the cold metal of the safe deposit box biting into my arm. The grief was gone, the sadness that had weighed me down for 3 years. The heavy blanket of mourning. It had evaporated, burned away by a fire so hot it felt like ice in my veins. I wasn't a grieving widower anymore. I wasn't a disappointed father. I wasn't a confused old man. I was a witness. I was a judge. And I was the executioner. I put the diary and the USB drive back into the box, tucking them safely under the stack of bonds I didn't need to take them with me. I had the truth burned into my brain. I locked the box and put the key in my pocket. I walked out of the bank, the air conditioning hitting the sweat on my face, making me shiver. But it was a good shiver, a shiver of awakening. I stood on the sidewalk, watching the traffic go by, watching the people rushing to their jobs, living their lives, unaware of the monsters that walked among them. I looked at my hands, the hands that had steered 18-wheelers, the hands that had built a business, the hands that had held Viola while she died. They were steady now, rock steady. Marcus thought I was weak. Tiffany thought I was senile. They thought they were dealing with a sheep they could shear and slaughter. They were wrong. They were dealing with a wolf who had just woken up to find his pack murdered. I turned and began the walk back to the bus stop, my stride long and purposeful. This limp in my hip forgotten, ignored. I was going back to that house. I was going back to the guest room. I was going to eat their watery oatmeal and take their poison pills and pretend to be the fool. But every time I looked at Marcus, I would see the coward who let his mother be hurt. And every time I looked at Tiffany, I would see the thief who wore my sweat on her finger. I wasn't going to just kick them out. I wasn't going to just call the police. That was too easy. That was too clean. I was going to destroy them. I was going to take everything they loved, everything they coveted, everything they thought they owned, and I was going to turn it into ash in their mouths. I was going to wait until they felt safe, until they thought they had won, until they were standing on the summit of their greed, and then I was going to push them off, just like she pushed Viola. I boarded the bus and sat in the back, watching the city slide by, reflecting in the glass. The old Otis Jenkins died in that vault. Today, the man who came out was something else entirely, something cold, something hard, something that wouldn't stop until the debt was paid in full. The walk back from the bus stop was the longest mile I have ever traveled, not because of the distance, but because of the transformation I had to undergo with every step I took toward that house. I had to shed a layer of the man I truly was. I had to strip away the intelligence, the strength, and the dignity that I had spent 75 years building brick by brick. I had to hollow myself out until I was nothing but the shell they expected to see, the husk of a man whose mind was leaking out of his ears. I stopped at the end of the driveway and looked up at the house. The lights were blazing in the living room, casting long shadows on the lawn that looked like prison bars. I took a deep breath, letting the cold air fill my lungs for the last time as a free man. Then I let my shoulders slump forward, curving my spine into a question mark. I let my jaw go slack, letting my mouth hang open just enough to look vacant. I relaxed the muscles in my face, erasing the lines of determination and replacing them with the smooth blankness of confusion. I wasn't Otis Jenkins, the CEO, anymore. I was just Otis, the burden. I shuffled up the steps, dragging my left foot heavily on the concrete, creating a scraping sound that announced my arrival like a warning bell. I fumbled with the doorknob, intentionally missing it twice before pushing the door open and stumbling into the hallway. "Honey," I called out, my voice trembling and high-pitched, completely unlike my natural baritone. "Honey, are you home?" I wasn't calling for Tiffany. I was calling for Viola, knowing full well she had been in the ground for 3 years. I walked into the living room, blinking against the harsh light of the TV. Tiffany was sprawled on my leather recliner, a glass of wine in her hand, watching some reality show where women screamed at each other over dinner. Marcus was sitting on the floor, assembling a piece of cheap furniture, probably something to replace the antiques they were planning to sell. "Viola?" I asked, looking around the room, my eyes darting frantically from corner to corner. "Viola, did you start the pot roast? I smell onions." Tiffany sat up so fast, she spilled wine on her white shirt, but she didn't curse. Instead, a slow, cruel smile spread across her face. She reached for her phone, her thumb swiping up to open the camera app. "Marcus, look," she whispered loud enough for me to hear. "He is having an episode. Get the light." Marcus looked up, his face pale and tired. "Dad, Mom is dead, remember? She died 3 years ago." I looked at him with a blank stare, tilting my head like a confused dog. "Dead? No, she was just here. She was wearing her blue dress, the one with the white flowers. She said she was making roast." I started to wander around the room, lifting sofa cushions, looking behind the curtains, muttering to myself. "Viola, come on now, don't play games. I am hungry. Where did you put the gravy boat?" Tiffany was filming now, holding the phone steady, her eyes gleaming with the predatory focus of a shark. She followed me around the room, documenting every stumble, every confused utterance. "That is it, Otis," she cooed, her voice mocking. "Tell us about Viola. Tell the camera what you see." "I see her," I shouted, suddenly pointing at the empty hallway, causing Marcus to jump. "She is right there. Why won't she talk to me? Why is she crying?" I started to cry then, big, racking sobs that shook my thin frame. It wasn't hard to cry. The grief was always there, sitting just below the surface, waiting for an exit. I let it out, channeling all the pain of her death, all the rage at her murder, into a performance of senile dementia. I sank to my knees on the rug, clutching my chest, rocking back and forth, calling her name over and over again until my throat was raw. Tiffany circled me like a vulture, capturing every angle, getting the perfect shot for the judge, getting the evidence that would sign my life away. "Look at him," she narrated for the video. "Completely disoriented, hallucinating, deceased relatives, aggressive outbursts followed by emotional collapse. He is a textbook case." Marcus stood up. He looked at me weeping on the floor, and for a second I saw a crack in his armor. I saw the son who used to sit on my lap while I read him stories. He took a step toward me, his hand reaching out. "Tiff, stop it," he said, his voice thick. "Maybe we should help him. He looks scared." Tiffany lowered the phone just an inch, her eyes snapping to Marcus like a whip. "Don't you dare touch him," she hissed. "Do you want to ruin this? We need this. Marcus, we need the judge to see how bad he is. If you help him, he just looks like a sad old man. If you let him spiral, he looks incompetent." "But he is my dad," Marcus whispered. "He is a paycheck," Tiffany spat back. "Do you want the inheritance, Marcus? Or do you want to be poor for the rest of your life? Do you want to go back to dodging calls from loan sharks? Because I don't. This is the only way out. Let him cry." Marcus pulled his hand back, the crack in his armor sealing shut with the glue of his greed. He turned away, unable to watch, but unwilling to stop it. I stayed on the floor for another 10 minutes, weeping, until I felt I had given them enough footage. Then I pushed myself up, wiping my nose on my sleeve, looking around with feigned clarity. "Where am I?" I whispered. "You are home, Otis," Tiffany said, zooming in on my snot-streaked face. "Go to your room. Go to the guest room." I nodded, obediently, shuffling toward the kitchen, but I stopped at the doorway. I knew I needed one more thing, one more piece of undeniable proof that my mind was gone. Something so humiliating that it would convince anyone. I looked at the large potted fern that stood in the corner of the entryway, a plant Viola had nurtured for a decade. I walked over to it, fumbling with the buckle of my belt. "Dad, what are you doing?" Marcus shouted, seeing me. I ignored him. I pushed my pants down just enough, and I urinated right into the planter, the sound loud and unmistakable in the quiet house. "Oh my God," Tiffany squealed, but she didn't look away. She kept the love. Camera rolling, moving closer to get the shot. "Oh my God, that is disgusting. He is peeing in the plant. Marcus, look at him, he is an animal." I finished zipping up my pants with clumsy fingers and looked at them with a vacant smile. "The bathroom was occupied," I mumbled. "It wasn't occupied," Marcus yelled, his face red with shame. "Dad, that is Mom's fern." "I don't know what you are talking about," I said, turning and walking into the guest room, closing the door behind me. I leaned against the door, listening. I heard Tiffany laughing, a high, hysterical sound of triumph. "Did you get it?" Marcus asked, his voice shaking. "I got everything," she said. "This is gold, Marcus, absolute gold. Urinating in the living room, hallucinating, screaming. That video alone is worth $2 million. We have him. We finally have him." I slid down the door until I was sitting on the floor, the humiliation burning my skin like acid. I had degraded myself. I had defiled my wife's memory. I had acted like a beast. But it worked. They were celebrating. They were high on their victory. They thought the game was over. They thought I was finished, which meant they would be careless. I waited in the dark room for hours, waiting for the house to settle, waiting for the adrenaline of their triumph to turn into the heavy sleep of the arrogant. I heard them order pizza, heard them open a bottle of champagne, heard them toasting to my decline. Around midnight, the house finally went quiet. I heard their bedroom door close upstairs, heard the heavy thud of boots and the click of heels, then silence. I waited another hour just to be sure, giving them time to fall into a deep alcohol-fueled sleep. Then I moved. I didn't shuffle this time. I moved with the silent precision of a cat. I opened the guest room door, avoiding the squeaky hinge I had oiled earlier with a drop of cooking oil. I crept through the kitchen, through the living room, past the fern that smelled of my shame, and up the stairs. Every step was a calculation. I stayed to the edges of the stairs where the wood was supported, avoiding the center treads that groaned. I reached the landing and looked at their door. It was closed but not locked. Why would they lock it? They were the jailers, and I was just the confused prisoner downstairs. I turned the knob slowly, a millimeter at a time, pushing the door open just enough to slip through. The room smelled of stale pizza and expensive perfume. Moonlight filtered through the blinds, illuminating the bed where my son and his wife lay sleeping, entangled in the sheets. I stood over them for a moment, my heart hammering against my ribs, a cold sweat breaking out on my forehead. If they woke up now, if they saw me standing here, not confused, not shaking, but focused and deadly, the game would be over. They would know. But they didn't stir. Marcus was snoring softly, his mouth open. Tiffany had an eye mask on, oblivious to the danger. Standing 3 feet away, I reached into my pocket and pulled out the devices I had bought from a spy shop in the period city 3 years ago. Devices I had meant to use to track shipments but never did. They were small black discs, no bigger than a quarter, with adhesive backs. I knelt down beside the nightstand on Tiffany's side of the bed, moving with agonizing slowness. I reached under the wood, feeling for a flat surface. I pressed the disc into place, counting to 5 to make sure it stuck. 1 down. I moved to the dresser across the room, the one where they piled their keys and wallets. I stuck the second disc behind the heavy mirror, pressing it into the frame. 2 down. I needed 1 more, one that would catch everything, even the whispers in bed. I crawled to the foot of the bed, lying flat on my stomach, inching forward across the carpet until I was under the bed frame, the dust bunnies tickling my nose. I reached up and stuck the third disc to the center support beam, right beneath where they slept. 3 down. I backed out slowly, retracing my path, sliding out from under the bed. Standing up silently, I looked at them one last time. Sleep tight, I thought. Sleep tight while you can, because tomorrow I start listening, and tomorrow everything you say will be a nail in your coffin. I slipped out of the room, closing the door until the latch clicked softly. I went back down the stairs, back to the guest room, back to my prison. I lay down on the narrow bed, my heart slowly returning to a normal rhythm. I felt dirty. I felt exhausted. I felt a deep, profound sadness for the man I had to become to survive this. But as I closed my eyes, I saw the image of Viola's diary. I heard the sound of her voice on the recording. They had taken my dignity today. They had made me play the fool. But I had planted the seeds of their destruction right under their heads. And when the harvest came, it was going to be bitter indeed. The smell of diesel fuel has always been the perfume of my life, a scent that usually brings me peace, reminding me of open highways and the freedom of the road. But today, as I stood in the lobby of Jenkins Logistics, it smelled like betrayal. I had built this building from the ground up, starting with a single trailer on a dirt lot, and turning it into the glass and steel headquarters of the largest transport fleet in the Midwest. But as I shuffled through the automatic doors, dragging my left foot and clutching a plastic bag of stale donuts, I wasn't the owner. I wasn't the CEO. I was just a confused old man looking for his son. The receptionist was a young woman I didn't recognize, new blood, who looked at my flannel shirt and my worn work boots with a mixture of pity and annoyance. She didn't know that I signed her paycheck. She didn't know that the chair she was sitting in cost $800 and that I had approved the purchase order personally. "Can I help you, sir?" she asked, her voice loud and slow the way people talk to children or idiots. "I am looking for my boy," I mumbled, letting my jaw go slack. I blinked rapidly, acting as if the fluorescent lights were confusing me. "I am looking for Marcus. Marcus Jenkins. He works here. He is a big shot." The receptionist sighed, typing something into her computer while popping her gum. "Mr. Jenkins is in a meeting, sir. Do you have an appointment?" I held up the bag of donuts, my hand trembling. Intentionally. "I brought him breakfast," I said, my voice wavering. "He likes the glazed ones. Tell him it is his daddy. Tell him Otis is here." She rolled her eyes and picked up the phone, whispering something urgent before hanging up. "He is coming down," she said. "Please, have a seat over there and try not to disturb the other clients." I shuffled over to a leather sofa in the waiting area, a sofa I had picked out myself 10 years ago, and collapsed onto it, letting my head loll back. I closed my eyes, feigning sleep, but my ears were sharp, tuned to the frequency of my empire. 10 minutes later, I heard the elevator ding, and the hurried, aggressive click of expensive shoes on the marble floor. "Where is he?" I heard Marcus hiss. I opened one eye just a crack. Marcus was storming across the lobby, wearing a navy blue suit that was tailored to hide his softening waistline. He looked like a corporate shark, but I knew he was just a minnow in a tank. He didn't understand. He saw me and stopped dead, his face flushing a deep crimson. He looked around, checking to see if anyone important was watching, before rushing over and grabbing my arm with a grip that was painful. "Dad," he whispered furiously, "what the hell are you doing here?" I blinked up at him, smiling a goofy, lopsided smile. "Hey, son," I said loud enough for the receptionist to hear. "I brought you donuts, the ones you like, from the corner store." Marcus snatched the bag from my hand and threw it onto the cushion beside me. "Get up," he hissed. "Get up right now, you can't be here. Look at you. You look like a homeless person. You are embarrassing me. I just wanted to see your office," I whined, letting him pull me to my feet. "I just wanted to see where my boy works." "You have seen it," Marcus snapped, dragging me toward the side corridor away from the main entrance. "Come on, I am putting you in a cab." "No," I protested, digging my heels in, acting petulant. "I need to use the bathroom, Marcus. I have to go bad." He groaned, running a hand over his face, frustration radiating off him like heat. "Fine," he spat. "There is a bathroom in the break room down this hall. Go, and then you are leaving. Do you understand? You are leaving." He marched me down the hallway, the same hallway where photos of our fleet hung on the walls, photos of trucks I had driven, photos of men I had hired. He didn't look at them. He didn't respect the history. He just shoved me into the break room, a small area with a coffee machine and a few tables. "Go," he pointed at the bathroom door, "and hurry up. I have a meeting in 5 minutes." I went into the bathroom and locked the door. I flushed the toilet immediately to make noise. Then I pressed my ear against the wood, waiting. I heard the door to the break room open again, followed by another set of footsteps, lighter, quicker. "Is he gone?" a voice asked. A voice I recognized as Brad, the slick accountant Marcus had hired 6 months ago, a man I had never trusted. "He is in the can," Marcus replied, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "God, he is losing it. Brad, he brought me donuts like I am 5 years old. He is totally senile." "Good," Brad said, laughing. A dry, nervous sound. "That is good for us. The more out of it he is, the easier this is going to be. So, did you get the files?" I leaned closer to the door, holding my breath. "Yeah, I got them," Marcus said, and I could hear the rustle of papers. I pulled the schematics for the new distribution center in Ohio and the full client list with the pricing tiers. "You are sure he doesn't know?" Brad asked, paranoia in his voice. "My dad," Marcus scoffed. "He doesn't know what day of the week it is. He thinks he is just a retired trucker. He has no idea about the shell companies or the real value of the contracts. He is a vegetable, Brad, a useless old vegetable." I clenched my fists, my fingernails digging into my palms, listening to my son describe me as a vegetable, while he held the keys to my kingdom in his hands. "And Redline is ready to buy?" Brad asked. Redline Logistics, our biggest competitor, the company that had tried to run us out of business in the 90s, the company that cut corners on safety and treated their drivers like cattle. "Yeah," Marcus said, his voice thick with greed. "I talked to their VP this morning. They are offering $200,000 cash for the client list and another $50,000 for the construction specs on the Ohio hub. $250,000, Brad. That covers my debt to the bookie, with enough left over to keep Tiffany happy for a month. $200,000. He was selling my life's work. He was selling the privacy of clients who had trusted me for decades. He was selling the trade secrets that kept 400 families fed, all to pay off a gambling debt. And the embezzlement," Brad whispered. "What about the maintenance fund?" "I already drained it," Marcus said casually. "We invoiced for repairs on 10 trucks that don't exist. The money is in the offshore account. We are clear, Brad. Once we sell this data to Redline, we take the cash, and we watch the company burn from the sidelines. When the stock tanks, we can convince the old man to sell the scraps. Or we just wait for him to die. Wait for him to die." The words hung in the air, heavy and toxic. I looked at my face in the bathroom mirror. The eyes that stared back weren't the eyes of a confused old man. They were the eyes of a predator who had just found his prey. He wasn't just stealing from me. He was treasonous. He was selling out his own heritage. He was willing to destroy the company that bore his name just to cover his own failures. He was a parasite, eating the host from the inside. Out I flushed the toilet again, loudly covering the sound of my own ragged breathing. I splashed water on my face, washing away the sweat of rage. I adjusted my flannel shirt, hunching my shoulders back into the posture of the defeated. I unlocked the door and stepped out. Marcus and Brad jumped, moving apart, guilt written all over their faces. Marcus shoved the papers behind his back. "You took long enough," he snapped, forcing a smile that looked like a grimace. "Feeling better, Dad?" I wiped my wet hands on my pants, looking at him with a vacant smile. "Who is your friend?" I asked, pointing at Brad. "This is Brad. He works with me," Marcus said dismissively. "Now come on. I called you a cab. It is waiting out back." He grabbed my arm again, steering me toward the rear exit, avoiding the lobby, avoiding the eyes of the employees. He was betraying. He walked me to the loading dock where a yellow taxi was idling. "Go home, Dad," he said, opening the door and shoving me in. "Stay there. Don't come back here. You are disrupting business." I looked at him sitting in the back of the cab, looking at the son who had just sold me out. "You are a good boy, Marcus," I whispered, my voice cracking intentionally. "You work so hard." Marcus didn't even blink. He just slammed the door and slapped the roof of the car, signaling the driver to go. I watched him walk back into the building, back to his partner, back to his crime. As the taxi pulled away, I sat up straight, the slump in my spine vanishing instantly, the confusion in my eyes replaced by a cold, hard clarity. "Driver," I said, my voice deep and authoritative, "pull over around the corner." The driver looked at me in the rearview mirror, surprised by the change in tone, but he obeyed, pulling to the curb. I reached into my boot and pulled out the secure satellite phone I kept strapped to my ankle, the one device Tiffany hadn't found, the direct line to the top. I dialed a number I knew by heart. It rang once. "Jenkins Logistics, Executive Office." A man's voice answered, crisp and professional. "Henderson," I said. There was a pause on the line, a silence of recognition and respect. "Mr. Jenkins," the voice said, the tone shifting instantly to deference. "Sir, I wasn't expecting a call. Is everything all right?" "No, Henderson, everything is not all right," I said, staring at the brick wall of my warehouse, listening to the hum of the city. "I need you to do something for me, and I need you to do it exactly as I say." "Anything, sir?" "Marcus Jenkins," I said, saying the name like a curse. "Yes, sir, the Midwest Regional Manager. He is currently in the building," I said. "He has a set of files in his possession. specifically the Ohio distribution schematics and the Tier 1 client list. He is planning to meet with a representative from Redline Logistics within the next 24 hours to sell that data. My God, Henderson gasped. Sir, should I have security detain him? No, I barked, cutting him off. No, do not touch him. Do not let him know you know. Do not restrict his access. Sir, I want to catch him in the hour. Act Henderson, I said, my voice dropping to a growl. I want him to feel safe. I want him to think he has gotten away with it. Let him make the meat. Let him hand over the files. Let him take the money. I want you to put a tracker on his car. I want you to mirror his email server. And I want you to have a team ready to move on my command. But until then, you treat him like the prince of the company. Do you understand? I understand, sir, Henderson said, his voice shaky. He thinks I am senile, Henderson, I said. He thinks I am a vegetable. I will make sure he continues to think that, sir. Good, I said, and Henderson. Yes, sir. When this is over, I want you to draft a termination letter for Marcus Jenkins, for cause effective immediately, and I want you to prepare the legal team. We are going to need to file charges for corporate espionage and grand larceny. Charges against your son, sir. He isn't my son anymore, I said, cold as ice. He is a corporate rat, and we exterminate rats. I hung up the phone and sat back in, the seat looking at the building that held my legacy. Marcus wanted to sell my company. He wanted to burn it down. He was about to find out that when you play with fire in a house built of gasoline, you don't just get burned, you get incinerated. Driver, I said, take me home. I had a performance to finish and a trap to spring. The balloons were the first insult. They were bright red and blue, bobbing against the ceiling of the living room like festive tumors, tied with ribbons that curled like snakes. My birthday wasn't for another 4 months, but that didn't matter to Tiffany. Dates were just details, and details were irrelevant when you were orchestrating a public execution of a man's character. She had filled my house, my sanctuary, with strangers, people I didn't know, people she called friends, but who were really just an audience needed for the final act of her play. I sat in the corner, in the wingback chair that used to be Viola's, wearing a party hat that dug into my forehead, the elastic straps snapping against my skin. I looked ridiculous. I knew I looked ridiculous, a 75-year-old man dressed up like a toddler at a birthday party. But that was the point. She wanted me to look foolish. She wanted me to look diminished. The room was buzzing with chatter, the clinking of glasses and the high-pitched laughter of people drinking free champagne. Tiffany had gone all out, hiring a caterer, putting out trays of shrimp and tiny sandwiches, spending my money to entertain the jury she had assembled. I scanned the room through half-closed eyes, playing the part of the dozing, senile old man. There were neighbors, people who had lived next to me for 20 years, but who hadn't spoken to me since the rumors started. Rumors Tiffany had planted about my aggression, about my wandering mind. They looked at me now with pity and fear, staying well back from my chair, as if dementia were contagious. There was a man in a gray suit standing near the fireplace, sipping scotch and watching me with cold, clinical eyes. That was Dr. Eris, the psychiatrist Tiffany had found, the one who charged $500 an hour to sign papers without asking questions. He wasn't here to diagnose me. He was here to condemn me. And there was a woman with a briefcase standing by the door, tapping her foot impatiently. A lawyer. I recognized. From the television, a shark who specialized in conservatorships, the kind of lawyer you hire when you want to strip someone of their rights and do it legally. Marcus was moving through the crowd, playing the role of the devoted, suffering son, shaking hands, accepting condolences for a father who wasn't even dead yet. He looked tired, his eyes darting toward me every few seconds, checking to make sure I was still sitting there, still quiet, still playing the fool. I let my head loll to the side and let a little drool escape the corner of my mouth. I saw Dr. Eris make a note on a small pad in his pocket. Good. Let him write. Let him document the decline. Let them all think the lion is sleeping. Tiffany clapped her hands, the sound cutting through the noise like a gunshot. Everyone, she announced, her voice projecting with the practiced charm of a stage actress. If I could have your attention, please. The room went quiet, faces turning toward her. She stood in the center of the room, looking radiant in a dress that cost more than my first truck, her hand resting possessively on Marcus's shoulder. Thank you all for coming, she said, smiling a sad, brave smile. "We know it is a little early for Otis's birthday, but given his condition, we thought it was important to celebrate while we still can, while he can still recognize the people who love him." A murmur of sympathy rippled through the crowd. "Poor Tiffany," they whispered. "She is a saint taking care of him like that." "It has been a hard year," she continued, dabbing at a dry eye with a lace handkerchief. "Watching Otis fade has been the hardest thing Marcus and I have ever had to do. We have tried everything to keep him here in his home, to keep him safe. But as many of you know, it is becoming dangerous." She paused, letting the weight of her lie settle over the room. "He leaves the gas on," she said, her voice trembling. "He wanders at night. He gets confused and aggressive. We found him urinating in the houseplants yesterday." The crowd gasped, scandalized eyes turning. To me, filled with disgust, I didn't flinch. I just stared blankly at a balloon floating near the ceiling, humming a discordant tune under my breath. "We realized," she said, squeezing Marcus's hand, "that we can't give him the care he needs anymore. We are not doctors. We are just children who love him too much to see him suffer." She turned to me, her face twisting into a mask of overwhelming love. "Otis, Daddy," she cooed, walking over to me, her heels sinking into the carpet. "We have a surprise for you, a gift." She reached into a large gift bag that had been sitting by the fireplace and pulled out a glossy brochure with a ribbon tied around it. "I want you to be safe, Otis," she said, handing it to me loudly so everyone could hear. "I want you to be somewhere where people can look after you, 24 hours a day." I took the brochure, my hands shaking intentionally. I fumbled with the ribbon, tearing it clumsily. It was a brochure for Shady Pines, a state-run facility on the south side. A place I knew. A place. Drivers whispered about a warehouse for the dying, where the smell of urine was permanent, and the staff turnover was higher than the survival rate. It was the cheapest, nastiest hole in the city. A place you sent people when you wanted them to rot, quickly and cheaply. "Look, Otis," Tiffany said, pointing at a picture of a bleak common room with plastic chairs. "Isn't it beautiful? They have activities. They have bingo. They have a garden. It is going to be like a vacation to hell," I thought. I looked up at her, looking into her eyes, and I saw the triumph there. She had won. She had humiliated me in front of everyone. She had the doctor, she had the lawyer, and now she had the public narrative. She was the hero, and I was the burden being gently released. The room was silent, waiting for my reaction, waiting for the crazy old man to throw a fit or to cry. I knew this was the moment. I knew if I let this pass, I would be in that van by morning. I felt the small plastic baggie in my pocket, the one I had palmed earlier, the one containing the white powder I had found under the seat of Marcus's car 3 days ago when I was pretending to wash it for him. Fentanyl, pure uncut death, the drug he was trafficking, the drug that had paid for Tiffany's dress. I had been saving it, waiting for the right moment to plant it, but looking at her smug face, looking at the fake pity in the eyes of my neighbors, I knew the moment was now. I stood up slowly, my knees popping, acting as if the effort was enormous. "Tiffany," I croaked, my voice wet and confused. "Yes, Daddy," she said, leaning in, expecting gratitude or confusion. "I don't want to go," I whispered, letting my lower lip tremble. "I want to stay with Viola." "Oh, Otis," she sighed loudly for the audience. "Viola isn't here, remember? You need to go where you will be safe." She reached out to pat my arm, a gesture of dismissal. I lurched forward as if my legs had given out. I stumbled, crashing into her, my shoulder hitting her chest hard enough to knock the wind out of her. "Oh," she gasped, staggering back, her high heels twisting on the carpet. I flailed my arms, grabbing at her for support, grabbing at her expensive silk blouse, grabbing at the strap of the designer purse that hung from her shoulder. "Help me," I shouted. "Help, I am falling." I went down, dragging her with me. We hit the floor in a tangle of limbs and fabric, the brochure for the nursing home fluttering down like a dead leaf. As we hit the ground, I yanked the purse hard, pulling it off her shoulder and turning it upside down in one fluid motion. Hidden by the chaos of the fall, everything spilled out: lipstick, compacts, keys, a wallet, and rolling across the Persian rug, stopping right at the feet of Dr. Eris, was the small, clear baggie filled with white powder. The room froze. The silence that fell was different this time. It wasn't respectful or sympathetic. It was the shocked vacuum of a scandal. I lay on the floor, groaning, clutching my hip, playing the victim. But my eyes were sharp watching Tiffany, scrambled up, pushing me away, her face red with anger. "You clumsy old fool," she hissed. Before remembering the audience, she looked down to gather her things, her hands shaking with rage. And then she saw it. She saw the baggie. She froze, her hand hovering over it, her eyes widening in genuine terror. She looked at Marcus, who was standing frozen by the fireplace, his face draining of all color. "What is this?" Dr. Aris asked, his voice cutting through the silence like a scalpel. He bent down and picked up the baggie, holding it up to the light. He was a corrupt man, but he was also a doctor, and he knew exactly what he was holding. "That is not mine," Tiffany shrieked, snatching at it, but the doctor pulled it away. "It fell out of your purse, Mrs. Jenkins," the lawyer said, stepping forward, her eyes narrowing. She smelled blood, and suddenly, it wasn't mine. "I didn't put that there," Tiffany stammered, looking around the room, looking for an ally but finding only suspicion. "He did it," she screamed, pointing a shaking finger at me. "Lying on the floor, he planted it. He is crazy." I looked up at her, my eyes wide and innocent. "Is that sugar?" I asked, my voice trembling. "Is that for my birthday cake?" "Don't play dumb with me, Otis," Tiffany screamed, lunging at me, her face contorted into a mask of pure, ugly hate. Marcus grabbed her, holding her back. "Tiff, stop. Shut up. It is drugs," the lawyer said, her voice cold and professional. "That is a significant amount of narcotics, Mrs. Jenkins, in a house with a vulnerable adult." "I don't do drugs," Tiffany wailed, hysteria taking over. "I don't know where that came from." "It came from your bag," Marcus whispered, his voice barely audible, but in the silence, it sounded like a scream. I sat up on the floor, rubbing my head, acting dazed. "I just wanted to stay home," I whimpered. "I don't like the white powder, it makes Marcus sleep too much." Every head turned to Marcus. He looked at me, and for the first time he saw it. He saw the glint in my eye. He saw the intelligence behind the mask. He realized in that second that the old man wasn't senile, that the old man had just cut his throat. "We need to leave," the lawyer said, snapping her briefcase shut. "I cannot be a party to this. I suggest you call a criminal defense attorney immediately." She walked out the door, her heels clicking like gunshots on the floor. The guests began to scramble, muttering excuses, avoiding eye contact, grabbing their coats, rushing for the exit as if the house were on fire. The party was over. The performance had been ruined. Dr. Aris looked at the baggie in his hand, then at Tiffany, then at me. He dropped the baggie onto the coffee table as if it were radioactive. "I am leaving," he said. "I will not be signing any papers today." He followed the crowd out, leaving only the four of us in the ruins of the party, me on the floor, Marcus and Tiffany standing over the evidence of their crime, and the ghost of Viola watching from the shadows. Tiffany turned to Marcus, hitting him on the chest. "You idiot," she hissed. "You told me the car. It was clean. You told me you got rid of it." "I did," Marcus said, his voice rising in panic. "I swear I did, Tiff. I don't know how it got there." I groaned loudly, drawing their attention back to me. "Can I have some cake now?" I asked, smiling, a gummy, vacant smile. "Get up," Tiffany screamed, kicking my leg. "Get up and get out of my sight." I stood up slowly, dusting off my pants. I looked at the brochure for Shady Pines lying on the floor. I stepped on it, grinding my heel into the glossy photo of the prison they had planned for me. "I am tired," I said, yawning. "I am going to take a nap." I shuffled toward the guest room, leaving them there. Leaving them with the drugs on the table and the ruin of their reputation hanging in the air. I closed the door and leaned against it, listening. I heard Tiffany screaming, heard glass breaking, heard Marcus crying. I smiled. "Happy birthday, Otis," I whispered to myself. The party was a disaster, but the gift was perfect. I had given them exactly what they deserved. I had given them enough rope to hang themselves, and they had kicked away the chair all on their own. The house was finally quiet. The last of the guests had fled the scene of my disgrace, leaving behind the smell of stale champagne and the echo of Tiffany's screaming. The only sound now was the hum of the refrigerator through the thin wall of the guest room, and the occasional creak of the floorboards upstairs, where my son and his wife were likely plotting their next move, or perhaps celebrating their victory. I sat on the edge of the twin bed, my hands trembling, not from the act I had put on earlier, but from the anticipation of what I was about to do. I reached into the hollow metal curtain rod, the hiding place that had served me well, and pulled out the small silver USB drive I had retrieved from safe deposit box 404. It felt cold in my hand, heavy with a weight that defied its size. This was Viola's voice. This was the truth she had died to protect. I pulled out the old laptop from beneath the loose floorboard under the bed, a relic from my days managing the fleet. It was slow and clunky, but it worked. I plugged in the drive and put on the headphones, the large padded cup sealing me off from the house, sealing me into a world where my wife was still alive. There was only one file on the drive labeled simply, "The End." I hesitated, my finger hovering over the play button. I knew that once I pressed it, the world would change forever. I knew that whatever innocence I still attributed to my son, whatever small hope I held on to, that he was just weak and manipulated, would be shattered. I pressed play. The audio started with a hiss of static, the sound of a phone being shuffled in a pocket. Then came Viola's voice, clear and strong, a voice I hadn't heard in 3 years, a voice that made tears spring to my eyes instantly. "I am recording this," she whispered, "because I am afraid Tiffany is coming over. She says she needs to talk, but she sounds dangerous. If anything happens to me, Otis, check the timestamp. I love you." There was a pause, the sound of a door opening, then the sharp click of us, heels on hardwood. Well, Tiffany's voice cut through the recording, loud and abrasive. "Aren't you going to invite me in? Or are you just going to stand there, clutching your Bible like a superstitious old bat?" "I am in my own house, Tiffany," Viola said, her voice steady but tight. "State your business." "I have told you, we are not giving Marcus any more money. It is not about money this time." Tiffany laughed, a sound like breaking glass, although the money would be nice. "It is about you, Viola. It is about you standing in the way of everything we deserve. You are just sitting on this pile of cash rotting away, while Marcus and I scrape by. It is disgusting." "We earned this money," Viola said quietly. "Otis worked for 50 years, and now he is old and you are useless," Tiffany spat. I could hear her stepping closer, the rustle of fabric on the recording. "Listen to me, you old witch. You are going to sign over the power of attorney. You are going to do it today, or I am going to make your life a living hell. I will tell everyone you are abusing Otis. I will tell them you are stealing from him. I will have you locked up so fast your head will spin." "Get out of my house," Viola said, her voice rising. "Get out before I call the police." "You aren't calling anyone." There was a scuffle, a sharp intake of breath, then the sound of a slap, loud and wet. "Don't you touch me," Viola cried out. I felt a phantom pain in my own cheek, a rage so hot it blurred my vision. She had hit her. She had hit my wife. "Give me the phone," Tiffany screamed. "Give it to me." Then came the sound of a struggle, feet scuffling on the floor, heavy breathing, the sound of a body hitting the wall. "Let me go," Viola gasped. "Let me go." "Why don't you just die?" Tiffany shrieked, and the venom in her voice was enough to kill. "Why don't you just die and free us from this debt, you useless old woman? Nobody wants you here. Nobody loves you, not even Marcus. He is just waiting for you to kick the bucket so we can live." "Liar," Viola shouted. "No, my son loves me. He hates you." Tiffany screamed. "He hates that you control the purse strings. He hates that he has to beg you for scraps." I heard a sudden movement, a rush of air, and then a sound that will haunt me until my dying day. It was the sound of a shove, a grunt of effort, followed by a terrified scream that was cut short. Then the sickening, heavy thud of a body hitting wood. Once, twice, 3 times. A cascading rhythm of bone against oak, tumbling down the long staircase that led to the foyer. Then silence. A silence so deep and terrible, it felt like the end of the world. I sat there in the dark guest room, tears streaming down my face, my mouth open in a silent scream of agony. My Viola, my beautiful, strong Viola, falling, dying, alone at the bottom of the stairs because of that monster. But the recording wasn't over. I heard footsteps walking slowly to the top of the stairs, then a voice. Oh my God. It was Marcus. He had been there. He had been there the whole time, hiding, watching, listening. "Marcus, help me." Tiffany's voice was breathless, panicked, but not sad. "She fell, Marcus. She just fell. I didn't touch her. She slipped." I heard Marcus walking down the stairs, his heavy boots thudding on the steps where his mother lay broken. "Mom?" he whispered. "Mom, can you hear me?" There was no answer, just a low, gurgling sound, a sound of someone trying to breathe through a crushed windpipe. "She is hurt, bad, Tiff," Marcus said, his voice trembling. "She is bleeding. We need to call 911. "No," Tiffany hissed, her voice sharp, commanding. "Don't you dare touch that phone. She is dying," Marcus cried. "If she dies, we get everything," Tiffany said, her voice dropping to a whisper, a seductive, poisonous whisper. "Think about it, Marcus. All the money, the house, the insurance. No more begging, no more debts. We will be free, Marcus. Free. But she is my mom. She is the thing standing between us and our life," Tiffany said. "Look at her, Marcus. She is gone anyway. Look at the angle of her neck. Even if she survives, she will be a vegetable. Do you want to take care of a vegetable for the next 10 years? Or do you want to be rich?" I heard Marcus breathing heavy, ragged breaths, the sound of a soul hanging in the balance. "What do we do?" he whispered. "We wait," Tiffany said, cold as ice. "We wait. 30 minutes. If she is still breathing, then we call and say we just found her. But we wait, Marcus. We let nature take its course. 30 minutes. 30 minutes of my wife lying on the cold floor, gasping for air, dying in pain while her son and his wife stood over her and watched the clock. 30 minutes that could have saved her." "Okay," Marcus said, and the word was the sound of a door slamming shut on his humanity. "Okay, we wait." The recording ended. I took the headphones off and laid them gently on the bed. I didn't scream. I didn't break anything. I simply slid off the mattress and curled up on the floor, my knees to my chest, and I wept. I wept for the woman I loved who died knowing her son wanted her gone. I wept for the boy I raised who had become a monster. Wept for the 3 years I had lived with these people, broken bread with them, let them call me family. This wasn't greed. This wasn't theft. This was murder. Cold, calculated matricide. They had watched her die. I lay there for a long time, the cold of the floor seeping into my bones until the tears stopped, until the grief hardened into something else, something black and heavy and indestructible. They killed her, and they thought they had gotten away with it. I sat up, wiping my face with my shirt. I looked at the laptop, at the small silver drive that held the proof of their damnation. I wasn't just going to take the company back. I wasn't just going to kick them out of the house. I was going to bury them. I reached for the burner phone, my hands steady now, steady with the purpose of a man who has nothing left to lose. I dialed the number for Tiny, my private investigator, the man who knew how to dig graves. "Tiny," I said when he answered. "Mr. Jenkins, it is late. Is everything all right?" "No, Tiny," said my voice, sounding strange to my own ears, devoid of any warmth, devoid of any mercy. "It is murder, Tiny." "What?" Tiny asked, his voice dropping. "Viola. I said they killed her, Tiny. I have the tape. They watched her die." "Jesus, Mr. Jenkins, I am so sorry." "Don't be sorry," I said. "Be ready. I need everything, Tiny. I need every dirty secret Tiffany has ever had. I need to know where she buys her drugs. I need to know who she sleeps with. I need to know every law Marcus has broken since he was born. I am going to build a cage, Tiny. I am going to build a cage so tight they won't even be able to breathe, and then I am going to lock them in it and throw away the key." "I am on it, Mr. Jenkins," Tiny said. "I will have a team on them by morning." "Good," I said. "And Tiny?" "Yes, sir. When the police come, and they will come, I want to make sure they have everything they need to put them on death row." I hung up the phone and looked out the small window at the brick wall. The rain had started again, a slow, steady drizzle that sounded like dirt hitting a coffin. I wasn't Otis the truck driver anymore. I wasn't Otis the CEO. I was the ghost of Viola Jenkins, and I was about to start haunting this house for real. The morning sun was struggling to break through the gray clouds over Chicago, but the air inside the house was clear and sharp, with the scent of freshly brewed danger. Tiffany was in the kitchen, wearing a silk robe that cost more than my first car, chopping fruit with a knife that flashed in the overhead light. She looked at me as I shuffled in, dragging my bad leg, playing the part of the confused old man. But her eyes were hard and impatient, like a woman waiting for a pot to boil over. "Otis," she said, her voice sugary sweet but thin. "You need to go to the store. We are out of almond milk, and Marcus needs his special coffee creamer, the hazelnut kind." I blinked at her, letting my mouth hang open slightly. "Store?" I mumbled, pawing at the pockets of my flannel shirt. "I don't know, Tiff. The truck is acting funny lately. Maybe Marcus should go." "No," she snapped, dropping the knife onto the cutting board with a clatter. "Marcus is busy. He is handling important business for the family. You can drive, Otis. You go." Have been driving since before I was born. Unless she paused, a cruel smile playing on her lips. Unless you admit that you can't handle it anymore. Unless you are ready to admit that you belong in a home. It was a trap, and a clumsy one at that. If I refused, she would use it as proof of my incompetence. She would tell the judge I was too scared to leave the house, that I was a prisoner of my own dementia. But if I went, well, I had a feeling. I knew what was waiting for me on the road. I looked at the keys hanging by the door. The keys to my 1978 Ford F-150. The truck I had bought brand new the year Marcus was born. The truck that had never let me down in 40 years. "I will go," I said quietly, taking the keys, my hand trembling just enough to sell the performance. "I will get the milk." "Good," she said, turning back to her fruit. "Don't take too long, Otis. Traffic is bad today." I walked out to the driveway, the cold, damp air biting at my face. I walked around the truck, patting the hood like I always did, checking the tires out of habit. Everything looked fine, but I didn't look underneath. I didn't check the lines. I was playing the fool, and fools don't do pre-trip inspections. I climbed into the cab, the smell of old leather and stale tobacco comforting me like a warm blanket. I turned the key, and the engine roared to life, a deep, throaty rumble that shook the frame. I backed out of the driveway, looking up at the house one last time. I saw the curtain in the master bedroom twitch. Someone was watching. Someone was waiting for the show to begin. I pulled out onto the main road, merging with the mid-morning traffic. I drove slowly, keeping to the right lane, letting cars pass me, letting them honk. I was just an old man in an old truck going to the store. But as I approached the hill on State Street, the one that leads down toward the river crossing, my gut tightened. A feeling I hadn't had since I was hauling steel through the Rockies in a blizzard. A primal instinct that screamed, danger. Took my foot off the gas, letting gravity take the truck down the slope. The speedometer creeping up. 30, 35, 40. The light at the bottom of the hill turned red. Cross traffic flowing like a river of metal. I moved my foot to the brake pedal, pressing down, expecting the firm resistance of the hydraulics, expecting the truck to slow. My foot went all the way to the floor. There was no resistance, no friction, just the sickening feeling of a pedal hitting the metal floorboard without engaging anything. I pumped it once, twice, 3 times. Nothing. I was doing 45 miles an hour in a 2-ton steel box with no way to stop, and a line of cars stopped at the red light in front of me. Panic flared hot and white in my chest for a split second. The urge to scream, to close my eyes. But then, the training took over. The 40 years of driving, the millions of miles of experience that Marcus and Tiffany thought made me useless. I didn't panic. I went to work. I grabbed the gear shift, slamming it down from drive into second gear. The transmission screamed metal grinding against metal, the engine roaring in protest as the RPMs redlined. The truck bucked, slowing slightly but not enough. I yanked the emergency brake, pulling the handle with all the strength left in my old arm. The rear tires locked, smoking, screeching against the asphalt. The truck fishtailing violently, sliding sideways toward the oncoming traffic. I fought the wheel, steering into the skid, keeping the nose pointed away from the minivan full of kids in the next lane, away from the bus stop crowded with people. I saw the gap to my right, a drainage ditch, a steep, muddy embankment that led down to a concrete culvert. It was a suicide run, a guaranteed wreck, but it was the only way to stop without killing someone else. I cranked the wheel hard to the right. The truck left the road, going airborne for a terrifying second before slamming down into the mud, the suspension groaning and snapping, the windshield shattering into a million diamonds as the nose of the truck plowed into the earth. The airbag didn't deploy. The truck was too old for that. Instead, my chest hit the steering wheel hard, the impact knocking the air from my lungs, my head whipping forward and cracking against the dash. Then silence. A silence broken only by the hiss of steam from the radiator and the ticking of cooling metal. I lay there, slumped over the wheel, tasting blood, tasting dust, tasting the bitterness of betrayal. I wasn't dead. I checked my limbs, wiggling my toes, clenching my fingers. Pain radiated from my ribs, and my forehead was wet. But I was alive. The old Ford had taken the beating for me, sacrificing its metal body to save mine. I heard voices shouting, people running down the embankment, hands pulling at the jammed door. "Sir, sir, can you hear me? Don't move. Help is coming." I let them pull me out. I let them lay me on the wet grass. I let the paramedics fuss over me, checking my pupils, taking my blood pressure. I didn't speak. I just stared at the sky, at the gray clouds drifting by, thinking about the cut line, thinking about the knife, thinking about my son. The police arrived within minutes, sirens wailing, lights flashing. A young officer with a kind face knelt beside me. "Sir, can you tell me what happened?" I opened my mouth to speak, to tell him about the brakes. But then I saw a car pull up on the shoulder. A sleek black BMW screeched to a halt, and Marcus jumped out, running down the hill, slipping in the mud, his face a mask of performative terror. "Dad!" he screamed. "Dad! Are you okay? Oh my God!" He threw himself down beside me, grabbing my hand, his eyes wide and wet. I told him not to drive. He wailed, looking up at the officer, grabbing the policeman's sleeve like a child seeking comfort. I told him he wasn't safe. "He is 75 years old, officer. He gets confused. He forgets which pedal is which." I took the keys away, but he must have found the spare. He was crying. Real tears. Tears of frustration that I wasn't dead. Tears of book. Fear that his plan had failed. Tears of an actor trying to sell the performance of a lifetime. I told Tiffany he shouldn't be on the road, Marcus sobbed, burying his face in his hands. "Look at this. He could have killed someone. He needs to be in a home. He needs to be somewhere safe." The officer looked at Marcus with sympathy, patting his shoulder. "Calm down, son. He is alive. That is what matters. Accidents happen, especially at his age." It worked. They were buying it. Marcus was painting the picture of the senile father and the responsible suffering son, and the wreck was the frame. I coughed, spitting blood onto the grass, sitting up slowly, pushing the paramedics away. "It wasn't an accident," I rasped, my voice sounding like gravel in a blender. Marcus froze, his head snapping up his eyes, locking onto mine with a flash of pure panic. "Dad, you are in shock," he said quickly, loud and desperate. "Just lie down. Let them take you to the hospital." I looked at the officer, ignoring my son, ignoring the lie. "Check the brake line," I said, pointing a shaking finger at the undercarriage of the truck, where it lay twisted in the ditch. "Check the rear left line, right near the axle." The officer frowned, looking from me to the truck. "Sir, the truck is totaled. It is likely the line snapped on impact." "Check it," I insisted, my voice gaining strength, the old authority of the fleet commander bleeding through the facade of the victim. "Check it, son." Humor, an old man. The officer hesitated, then sighed, signaling to one of the firefighters who was inspecting the wreck. "Hey, Cap, check the brake lines for me, will you? The driver thinks they failed." Marcus was trembling, now vibrating with a frequency that wasn't grief, it was terror. He stood up, pacing back and forth, running his hands through his hair. "This is ridiculous," he muttered. "He is confused. He doesn't know what he is talking about. Dad, stop making a scene." The firefighter crawled under the lifted rear of the truck, his flashlight beam cutting through the gloom. There was a long silence, a silence that stretched until it felt like a wire pulling tight around Marcus's neck. Then the firefighter crawled back out, his face grim. He walked up the hill, wiping grease from his hands on his turnouts. He looked at the officer, then at me, then at Marcus. "It was an impact," he said, his voice flat serious. "What do you mean?" the officer asked. "The line is cut," the firefighter said, holding up his gloved hand, showing a smear of brake fluid. "It is a clean cut, straight through. Looks like wire cutters or a serrated knife. There is no fraying, no rust. Someone sliced it." The air left the conversation, sucked out by the gravity of the accusation. The officer turned to Marcus, his expression changing instantly, the sympathy evaporating, replaced by the cold, hard suspicion of the law. Marcus took a step back, holding his hands up, palms out. "I don't know anything about that," he stammered, his voice high and thin. Why are you looking at me? I wasn't even home. I was at work. Nobody said you were home. Sir, the officer said, stepping closer, his hand resting near his belt. We just said the line was cut. But he is confused, Marcus shouted, pointing at me. He probably did it himself. He gets paranoid. Maybe he cut it thinking he was fixing it. He tries to fix things all the time and breaks them. I looked at my son, looked at the desperation in his eyes, the willingness to accuse his father of sabotage to save his own skin. I looked at the officer, and I let the mask slip just a fraction, just enough for him to see the clarity in my eyes. Officer, I said quietly, does a man cut his own brakes before driving down a hill? Does a man try to kill himself on the way to buy milk for his son? The officer looked at me, then back at Marcus. Sir, I am going to need you to stay right here, he said to Marcus, his voice leaving no room for argument. We are going to need to ask you some questions about who has access to this vehicle. Marcus looked like he was going to vomit. He looked at the truck, looked at the cut line. Looked at me, I didn't say a word. I just held his gaze, my eyes cold and empty, reflecting the gray sky. You missed. I thought you missed. And now the ricochet is coming for you. I let the paramedics load me onto the stretcher, the pain in my ribs finally taking over. But as they lifted me into the ambulance, I saw the officer taking Marcus's phone. I saw them taping off the scene, not as a traffic accident, but as a crime scene. I closed my eyes as the doors shut, listening to the siren wail. It wasn't a victory, not yet. They hadn't arrested him. They hadn't found the knife. But the seed was planted. The doubt was there. Marcus had tried to kill me, and in failing, he had handed me the weapon I needed to bury him. I lay back on the gurney, the rhythm of the road vibrating through my broken body. And for the first time since Viola died, I didn't feel fear. I felt the cold, grim satisfaction of a man who knows the war has finally begun. The drive back from the courthouse was a funeral procession for the living. The silence in the car was heavy and toxic, thick with the smell of Marcus's fear and Tiffany's simmering rage. She drove the BMW with white-knuckled aggression, cutting off other drivers, slamming on the brakes, muttering curses under her breath. She was a kettle boiling over, and I knew it was only a matter of time before the whistle blew. I sat in the back seat, slumped against the window, watching the familiar streets of my neighborhood roll by. It was a good neighborhood, a quiet place where people took care of their lawns and looked out for each other. My neighbors were mostly retired folks, good people like Mrs. Higgins, who baked cookies for the church, and Mr. Henderson, who always waved when he was walking his golden retriever. They were decent people who thought Marcus and Tiffany were saints for taking care of me. They were about to learn the truth. When we pulled into the driveway, Tiffany didn't even wait for the car to stop completely before she threw it into park and stormed out, slamming the door so hard the windows rattled. Marcus scrambled after her, looking like a beaten dog trying to keep up with its master. I followed slowly, dragging my bad leg, playing the part. My eyes scanning the front of the house. I noticed that the kitchen window was open just a crack, probably left that way by Tiffany in her haste this morning to stage the house for the investigation. But that wasn't enough. I needed more volume. I needed an audience. I shuffled up the porch steps, my hand brushing against the panel by the front door. It was an old intercom system, installed in the 80s, a relic Viola had insisted on so she could call me in from the garage for dinner or play music into the backyard during barbecues. It was connected to speakers on the porch and in the garden, speakers that were powerful enough to be heard 3 houses down. I fumbled with the panel, acting confused, my fingers trembling as I pressed the button marked All Call and locked it in the on position. A small red light flickered to life, unnoticed in the bright afternoon sun. The stage was set, the microphone was hot. I walked into the house, the coolness of the air conditioning hitting my face, but it did nothing to cool the fire raging in the living room. Tiffany was pacing back and forth, kicking off her expensive heels, throwing her purse onto the sofa, her face twisted into a mask of pure, unadulterated hatred. She wasn't hiding it anymore. She wasn't playing the loving daughter-in-law. There were no doctors here, no judges, just the 3 of us, and the ghosts of her ambition. "I can't believe this," she screamed, her voice shrill and piercing, echoing off the walls and unknowingly out into the quiet street. "I simply can't believe it. How did they find the drugs, Marcus? How did that lawyer know about the Haldol? We were so careful." "I don't know, Tiff," Marcus stammered, leaning against the wall, looking like he wanted to melt into the plaster. Maybe Dad found them. Maybe he is not as out of it as we think. Shut up, Tiffany shrieked, spinning on him. Don't be stupid. Look at him. She pointed a shaking finger at me as I stood in the doorway, blinking vacantly, swaying slightly on my feet. He is a vegetable, Marcus, she yelled. A drooling, useless sack of bones. He didn't do anything. He just got lucky. He has always been lucky, stumbling through life while better people like me have to scratch and claw for every dime. She walked toward me, her eyes wild, invasive. I hate you, she hissed, getting right in my face, her breath smelling of mints and bile. I hate everything about you, Otis. I hate your smell. I hate your shuffling. I hate this ugly house with its cheap furniture and its smell of old people cooking. She grabbed the lapels of my jacket, shaking me. Do you know why I married your loser son? She screamed, and I knew the neighbors could hear every word. I knew Mrs. Higgins was probably pausing in her garden. I knew Mr. Henderson was stopping on the sidewalk. I married him because he told me you had land. She shouted the truth, finally ripping its way out of her throat. He told me his daddy was sitting on acres of property down south. He told me this house was worth a fortune. He told me you were going to die soon and leave us millions. I let my head bobble, acting terrified, acting confused, but my eyes were locked on hers, recording every sin. But you didn't die, did you? She continued, pushing me backwards so I stumbled onto the sofa. You just kept living, sitting here, breathing up my air, eating my food, forcing me to wipe your drool. And for what? For this dump? She waved her arms around the room. I am a queen, Otis, she screamed. I deserve a palace, not to be a nursemaid to a broke black old man who doesn't even know his own name. The racial slur hung in the air, ugly and raw. I looked at Marcus. Surely this was it. Surely this was the line. He was a black man. He was my son. He had grown up hearing stories of what his grandfather endured in the South. He knew the weight of that hate. But Marcus just stood there. He looked at the floor, his shoulders hunched, his hands in his pockets. He didn't speak. He didn't defend me. He didn't defend himself. He just took it. He absorbed her hate like a sponge, accepting it as the price of admission to her bed. Tiffany laughed a cruel barking sound, seeing his submission. Look at him, she said, pointing at Marcus. Look at your son, Otis. He is pathetic. He knows what you are. He knows you are nothing. He knows you are just a stepping stone. He hates you too. You know, he hates being black. He hates being poor. He wants to be me. He wants what I have. She turned back to me, her face contorted with disgust. I should have let you die in that car, she whispered. But the whisper was hissed loud enough for the microphone to catch. I should have cut all the lines, not just one. The confession. She had admitted it. She had admitted the sabotage. She had admitted the attempted murder. And she had done it while the whole neighborhood listened. I looked at Marcus, waiting, hoping for one spark of redemption. Marcus, I rasped, my voice low. Please. He looked up, his eyes meeting mine. And I saw the emptiness there, the total moral vacuum. Let her talk, Dad, he mumbled, looking away. She is just stressed. Don't upset her. That was it. The final nail. The final betrayal. He wasn't just weak. He was complicit. He was willing to let his wife spit on his father's race, on his father's life, just to keep the peace, just to keep the dream of money alive. Tiffany turned away from me, disgusted, done with her rant. She walked over to the bar cart and poured herself a drink, her hands shaking. God, I need a drink, she muttered. I need to figure out how to fix this mess. We need to find another doctor, Marcus. Maybe that guy in Jersey, the one who owes you money. I stood up slowly, the joints in my knees popping in the silence. I wasn't shaking anymore. I wasn't stooped. I stood to my full height, 6 feet 2 inches of leverage and muscle, built over 50 years of hauling freight. I walked over to the wall panel, the one by the door. Tiffany turned glass halfway to her mouth, frowning. What are you doing? She asked, her voice sharp, suspicious. I pressed the button, turning the intercom off, the red light blinking out, silence falling over the street outside. Silence, where the truth was now settling into the ears of the witnesses. I looked at Tiffany, then I looked at Marcus. I let the mask drop completely. For the first time, I let the intelligence back into my eyes. I let the power flow back into my stance. I looked at my son, the boy I had raised, the man who had just stood by and let a racist murderer insult his blood. "You are not a man," I said, my voice deep and steady, resonating in the quiet room. Not the voice of a senile invalid, but the voice of the patriarch. Marcus's head snapped up, his eyes widening in shock, jaw dropping. Tiffany dropped her glass. It hit the floor and shattered, gin and tonic splashing over her expensive shoes. "What?" she whispered, stepping back, fear flashing in her eyes. "You spoke." I looked at Marcus, ignoring her, ignoring the mess, ignoring the woman who was already a walking corpse in my eyes. I looked only at my son. "You stood there," I said, walking toward him, every step heavy with judgment. "You stood there and let her call you that. You let her call me that, Dad." Marcus stammered, backing away until he hit the wall, his face pale. You are okay." "I am more than okay," I said, stopping inches from him. Looking down at him, seeing the sweat on his upper lip, seeing the terror of a child caught in a lie. "I fed you," I said, my voice quiet but thunderous. "I clothed you. I paid for your mistakes. I loved you when you were unlovable. I thought you were just weak, Marcus. I thought you were just foolish." I shook my head, the disappointment tasting like ash in my mouth. "But you are worse than weak." I pointed at the door where the neighbors were likely gathering on the sidewalk, talking, whispering, calling the police. "You aren't a son," I said, and the words cut the air like a knife. "You aren't even a man." I looked him up and down, stripping him of his dignity, stripping him of his excuses. "You are not even a guard dog," I spat, looking at him with pure disgust. "A dog barks when a thief comes in the door. A dog bites when someone hurts its master. You just rolled over and showed your belly, Otis." Tiffany screamed, finding her voice, trying to regain control. "What is going on? Stop acting like this. You are confusing us." I turned to her, my eyes cold, dead. "I am done acting, Tiffany," I said, and then the doorbell rang. It wasn't a polite ring. It was a heavy, insistent pounding, the kind of knock that comes with a badge. I looked at the door, then back at them. "I think your audience is here," I said. I walked past them, walking with the stride of a king reclaiming his castle. I opened the front door. Standing there were Mrs. Higgins and Mr. Henderson, and behind them, pulling up to the curb, were two police cruisers, lights flashing, silent and blue. "Mr. Jenkins," Mrs. Higgins said, her hand over her mouth, her eyes wide with horror. "We heard everything. Are you all right?" I looked at her and gave her a sad, tired smile. "No, Mrs. Higgins," I said. "I am not all right, but I am alive." I stepped aside, letting the officers in, pointing a steady finger at the two people freezing in my living room. "Officer," I said, my voice clear and strong, "I would like to report a murder. Confession, and I believe my neighbors heard it too." As the police walked in, I saw Marcus slide down the wall to the floor, burying his face in his hands, weeping. But I didn't feel pity anymore. I just felt the cold, clean wind of justice blowing through the house, sweeping out the rot. The darkness in the guest room was absolute, a heavy, suffocating blackness that felt like the inside of a tomb. I lay on the narrow twin mattress, my breathing shallow and controlled, my eyes fixed on the sliver of light beneath the door, waiting for the final act of this tragedy to begin. The house was quiet. Now the police had gone, taking their reports and their suspicions with them, promising to investigate the brake lines, promising to look into the drugs, but promises take time. And Tiffany didn't have time. She was a cornered rat, and I knew that rats bite hardest when they are trapped. I shifted slightly, the springs creaking beneath me, and my hand tightened around the cold steel of the Colt 45 resting on my chest. It was an old gun, a relic from my days driving through the Badlands, but tonight it was empty. I had removed the firing pin and the bullets hours ago. I didn't want to kill my son. I wanted to see if he would kill me. It was the final test, the last desperate hope of a father, praying that his boy would find a shred of humanity before it was too late. I reached up and adjusted the small earbud in my left ear, the one connected to the bugs I had planted in their bedroom. The audio feed was grainy, filled with the hiss of static, but I could hear them arguing, their voices low and frantic. "We are done, Marcus," Tiffany was whispering, her voice shaking with a mix of terror and rage. "The neighbors heard everything. The police are going to trace the brake lines to the cutters in the garage. We are going to prison, Marcus. Do you understand? Federal prison. I can't go to jail, Marcus sobbed, a pathetic wet sound. I can't do it, Tiff. I will die in there. Then do something about it, she hissed. What can I do? Finish it, she said, and the coldness in her voice made the hair on my arms stand up. Finish what we started. On the road. He is downstairs, Marcus. He is sleeping. He is old. His heart is weak. Nobody would question it if he just stopped breathing in his sleep. No, Marcus whispered. Yes, Tiffany insisted. Listen to me. If he dies tonight, the investigation dies with him. The guardianship case goes away. The house becomes ours. The insurance pays out, and we can pay off the lawyers and leave the country. We can go to Rio, Marcus, just like we talked about. But he is my dad. He is the man who is sending you to prison, she snapped. He is the man who humiliated you today. Do you think he loves you? He hates you, Marcus. He thinks you are weak. Prove him wrong. Prove to me you are a man. There was a long silence, a silence that stretched until it felt like a wire tightening around my throat. Do it, she commanded. I heard the rustle of fabric, the sound of a zipper, then the soft thud of something being thrown. Take this, she said. What is it? It is a pillow, Marcus. It is soft. It is quick. Just hold it down until he stops struggling. Count to 3 minutes, just to be sure. 3 minutes. I lay there in the dark, tears leaking from the corners of my eyes, sliding into my ears. My own son was calculating the time it would take to snuff out my life. He wasn't arguing anymore. He wasn't fighting for me. He was just listening to the logistics of murder. Go, she whispered. Do it for us. Do it for me. I heard the bedroom door open upstairs, heard the heavy, reluctant tread of boots on the stairs. 1 step, 2 steps, coming closer, coming for me. I gripped the gun tighter, my knuckles turning white. I signaled into the darkness, tapping the side of the mattress 3 times, a signal to the ghosts hiding in the room with me. I wasn't alone inside the narrow closet. Cramped behind my old winter coats were 2 officers from the Major Crimes Unit, men Tiny had arranged. Men who had listened to the wiretap live. Under the bed, squeezed into the dust and the dark, was a 3rd officer, his hand resting on my ankle, ready to move. We were all waiting. The footsteps reached the bottom of the stairs. They paused outside my door. I could hear Marcus breathing, heavy, ragged breaths, like a runner at the end of a race. I could smell his fear, his sweat, the cheap whiskey he had drunk to build his courage. The doorknob turned slowly, the latch clicking with a sound like a gunshot in the silence. The door creaked open, spilling a wedge of hallway light across the floor, creating a long, distorted shadow that stretched over my bed. Marcus stood in the doorway. He looked like a nightmare. His face was pale, sweat beading on his forehead, his eyes wide and bloodshot, rimmed with red. He was wearing his pajamas, but his hands were gloved in black leather, driving gloves, my driving gloves. In his hands he held a large down pillow, the white pillowcase looking bright and clean in the gloom. I didn't move. I kept my breathing even, mimicking the rhythm of sleep. I watched him through the slits of my eyelids, watched my executioner enter the room. He took a step forward, his knees shaking so hard I could see the fabric of his pants trembling. "I am sorry, Dad," he whispered, his voice a broken croak that barely disturbed the air. "I am so sorry." He was crying. Tears were streaming down his face, dripping off his chin, landing on the pillow he was going to use to kill me. But he didn't stop. He took another step and another, closing the distance until he was standing right over me. I could smell the alcohol on his breath. I could feel the heat radiating from his body. He raised the pillow. I saw his muscles tense. I saw his jaw set. I saw the moment he decided, the moment he chose the money over the man, the moment he chose the wife who hated him over the father who loved him. He lunged. He brought the pillow down hard, shoving it into my face, pressing with all his weight, cutting off the light, cutting off the air. I didn't fight back, not at first. I let him feel it. I let him feel the resistance of bone and flesh. I let him feel what it was like to murder his father. I wanted that feeling to be burned into his hands forever. I gagged, thrashing my legs, mimicking the death throes of a suffocating man. "Press harder," Tiffany's voice echoed. In my memory, count to 3 minutes. Marcus was sobbing loudly, Now, a guttural animal sound of despair, urging me to die, begging me to make it quick. "Please, Dad, just go, he wailed, pressing down harder, his weight crushing my chest. That was it. The verdict was in. He was guilty. I brought my right hand up, the hand holding the heavy steel of the Colt. I didn't aim it, I just swung it hard, striking his wrist with the barrel of the gun. Marcus yelped in pain and surprise, his grip loosening just enough for me to twist my head and suck in a desperate lungful of air. Now I shouted, my voice hoarse but commanding. The room exploded. The closet door burst open, slamming against the wall, the two officers charging out with weapons drawn, their tactical lights cutting through the darkness blindingly bright. "Police! Drop it! Drop the pillow!" The officer under the bed rolled out, grabbing Marcus's ankles and yanking his legs out from under him. Marcus screamed, falling backward, hitting the floor with a bone-jarring thud, the pillow flying from his hands and landing softly in the corner. I sat up, gasping for breath, clutching the gun, my chest heaving. "Don't move. Stay down. Police." Marcus was scrambling on the floor, trying to back away, his hands raised to shield his eyes from the lights. He looked like a cornered rat, like a child waking up from a bad dream. "Dad!" he screamed. "Dad, help me! They are going to hurt me!" I looked down at him from the bed, the barrel of my empty gun resting on my knee. I looked at the son who had just tried to smother me, the son who had cried while he did it. I didn't feel anger anymore. The anger had burned out, leaving only a cold gray ash of indifference. "You didn't help me," I said, my voice flat, barely audible over the shouting of the officers. "You didn't help your mother." Tiffany appeared in the doorway, drawn by the noise, her face a mask of shock. She saw the police. She saw Marcus on the floor. She saw me sitting up alive and armed. "Run, Marcus," she screamed. "Run!" But there was nowhere to run. An officer grabbed her, spinning her around and slamming her against the doorframe, cuffing her hands behind her back. "Get off me!" she shrieked, kicking and spitting. "Do you know who I am? I am a victim here. He is crazy. He tried to shoot us." "Save it, lady," the officer said, tightening the cuffs. "We heard everything. We have the wire." "The wire?" Tiffany went still, her face draining of color. She looked at me and she realized that the old man hadn't been sleeping, realized that the prey had been the hunter all along. "You old bastard," she hissed. I stood up, my legs shaky but holding. I walked over to where Marcus lay pinned to the floor by the officer's knee. He looked up at me, tears mixing with the dust on his face. "Dad, please tell them it was a mistake. Tell them I was just trying to help you sleep." I looked at him, looked at the man I had named after my own father, looked at the end of my bloodline. "You tried to kill me, son," I said quietly. "No, Dad, no. I love you." I shook, my head slowly. "You love money, Marcus, and you love her, and that love just cost you your life." "Officer, get him out of here," I said, turning my back on him. "I don't want to see him anymore." They dragged him out screaming, begging, calling my name. I didn't turn around. I sat back down on the bed, holding the pillow he had used, holding the evidence of his betrayal. The house was full of noise, radios crackling, officers shouting orders, the sounds of justice grinding its gears. But inside me, it was quiet. The war was over. I had won. But as I looked at the empty doorway where my son had stood, I realized that in a war like this, there are no winners. There are only survivors. And I was the last one left. The silence in the house was different now. It wasn't the heavy, suffocating silence of a prison that Tiffany had imposed. It was the clean, empty silence of a battlefield after the smoke is cleared. The police had finished their work hours ago, taking their evidence bags and their statements, and leaving me alone in the wreckage of my home. I spent the first hour just walking through the rooms, reclaiming my territory. I went into the living room and threw the cushions Tiffany had bought onto the floor, kicking them into the corner. I went into the kitchen and threw out her kale and her quinoa and her almond milk, dumping them into the trash with a satisfaction that felt childish but necessary. I opened the windows, letting the cool night air blow through, chasing away the smell of her perfume and the lingering scent of Marcus's fear. Then I cooked. I went to the freezer in the garage, the one they hadn't touched because they thought it was full of old junk, and I pulled out 2 thick pork chops, butcher cut, the kind with the bone in. I seasoned them with salt and pepper and garlic powder, simple, honest flavors. I fired up the cast iron skillet, the one Viola had used for 30 years, and I listened to the meat sizzle, a sound of life returning to a house that had been dead for too long. I set the table for 2. I put my plate at the head of the table, and I put Viola's plate to my right, just like always. I poured 2 glasses of iced tea, the condensation dripping onto the wood. I sat down and looked at her empty chair. I didn't see emptiness. I saw her. I saw the way she used to smile when I complimented her cooking. I saw the way she would reach over and squeeze my hand when the bills were tight. I saw the woman who had built this life with me, brick by brick, mile by mile. We did it, V, I whispered into the quiet room. We survived. I ate slowly, savoring every bite, tasting the freedom, tasting the vindication. The meat was tender, the tea was sweet, and for the first time in 3 years, I didn't have to look over my shoulder. I didn't have to worry about being scolded or mocked or drugged. I was halfway through my meal when the phone rang. It was the landline, the old rotary phone on the kitchen wall that Tiffany had tried to get me to disconnect a dozen times because it was ugly and obsolete. I had kept it because it was the number Viola had memorized, because it was the line to the past. It rang with a shrill mechanical trill that echoed through the empty house. I knew who it was before I stood up. I knew who would be calling at 8 o'clock at night from a place where they only give you 1 phone call. I wiped my mouth with a napkin and walked over to the wall, taking my time, letting it ring 4, 5, 6 times, letting him sweat, letting him wonder if the old man was even there. I picked up the receiver, holding it to my ear without saying a word. "You have a collect call from the Cook County Department of Corrections," a robotic voice announced from inmate Marcus Jenkins. "Do you accept the charges?" I paused, looking at the cord twisting against the wall. I thought about rejecting it. I thought about leaving him in the dark with his demons. But curiosity is a powerful thing, and maybe, just maybe, there was a small part of me that wanted to hear him beg. "Yes," I said, my voice calm, steady. "I accept." There was a click, a burst of static, and then a sound that was pure panic. "Dad, Dad, are you there?" It was Marcus, but it didn't sound like the arrogant man who had stood in my living room hours ago, calling me a vegetable. It sounded like a child who had woken up in a nightmare. "I am here, Marcus," I said, leaning against the counter, watching the steam rise from my skillet. "Oh, thank God. Oh, thank God, Dad. You have to help me. You have to get me out of here. It is insane in here, Dad. It smells like puke, and there are guys screaming, and they took my shoes. They took my shoes, Dad." I listened to him ramble, listened to the total disintegration of his composure. He had always been soft, Marcus had, never known a hard day in his life, because I had shielded him from them. I had worked double shifts so he could have the new sneakers. I had driven through ice storms so he could go to college. I had created a cushion for him, and now that cushion was gone, and he was hitting the concrete, hard. "What do you want, Marcus?" I asked, cutting through his babbling. "I need bail, Dad," he shouted, his voice cracking with desperation. "The judge set it at $500,000, Dad. $500,000 cash, they said. I am a flight risk because of the offshore accounts they found. They said, it is attempted murder, Dad. You have to post it. You have to get me out tonight. I can't stay here. $500,000. I looked around my kitchen at the old cabinets, at the linoleum floor that was starting to peel in the corner. "That is a lot of money, son," I said, my voice flat. I know, but you have the house," Marcus said, the gears of his greed turning even in his panic. "The house is paid off, right? It is worth at least $600,000 or $700,000 in this market. You can take out an emergency equity loan or a second mortgage. Call Mr. Klein, call the bank, do whatever you have to do, just get the money." He wasn't asking how I was. He wasn't asking if I was hurt. He wasn't apologizing for trying to smother me with a pillow 5 hours ago. He was doing what he had always done, treating me like an asset, treating me like a piggy bank that he could break open whenever he was in trouble. "Dad, are you listening?" Marcus screamed into the silence. "Dad, wake up! I need you to focus." I reached out and pressed the speaker button, hanging the receiver back on the hook so his voice filled the kitchen, so Viola could hear him too. "I am listening, Marcus," I said loud and clear. "Then do it. Go to the bank in the morning. No, go online now. You can apply online. Get the money, Dad, please. They are going to kill me in here. I walked back to the table and sat down, picking up my fork, taking another bite of my pork chop, chewing slowly. I don't think I can do that, Marcus, I said, my mouth full. What do you mean you can't? Marcus shrieked. You have to. I am your son, I swallowed, taking a sip of tea. Well, son, I said, my voice dripping with a sarcasm that was lost on him. I am just a confused old man, remember? I am just a retired truck driver with a bad hip and a rotting brain. Where in the world would a useless old moocher like me get $500,000? There was a silence on the line, a stunned pause as my words hit him. Dad, what are you talking about? Stop playing around. I am not playing, Marcus, I said, leaning toward the phone, speaking to the plastic box as if it were his face. Yesterday, you stood in my living room and told your wife that I was a vegetable. You told her I was a burden. You told her I was nothing but a stepping stone to your inheritance. Dad, I didn't mean. You meant every word, I cut him off, my voice turning hard. You meant it when you let her poison me. You meant it when you cut my brake lines. And you certainly meant it when you walked into my room. With that pillow, Dad, please. You said I was useless, Marcus. You said I was broke. You said I was a senile old fool who didn't know his own name. Well, son, you can't have it both ways. You can't treat a man like garbage and then expect him to be your savior. But the house, Marcus pleaded, his voice breaking into a sob. The house is all we have. The house is mine, I said, cold as the grave, and I am not mortgaging one single brick of it to save the man who tried to kill me in it. Dad, no, please don't do this. You did this, Marcus, I said, standing up and walking back to the phone. You did this to yourself. You gambled and you lost, Dad. Goodbye, Marcus, I said, my hand hovering over the receiver. No, Dad, wait. Tell me you love me. Please just tell me. I looked at the phone, looking at the last connection to my son. I love the boy you were, I whispered. I love the memory of the son I raised. But that man is dead, Marcus. You killed him, just like you killed your own mother. I hung up the phone, cutting off his scream mid-breath. The silence rushed back into the room, instant and absolute. I stood there for a moment, my hand resting on the plastic, looking at the wall. It was done. The cord was cut. I walked back to the table and sat down across from Viola's empty chair. I picked up my fork, but my appetite was gone. The pork chop looked cold and unappealing. I reached out and took Viola's hand, or the memory of her hand resting on the tablecloth. We are free, Vi, I whispered, the tears finally coming, hot and fast. We are finally free. I sat there in the quiet kitchen, an old man in an empty house with a bank account full of millions and a heart full of ghosts. But for the first time in a long time, the air in the room was clean, and I could breathe. The smell of gun oil has a way of settling the nerves. It is a sharp, clean scent that cuts through the musty odor of old lies and fresh betrayal. I sat in my favorite leather armchair in the living room, a rag in one hand and the disassembled barrel of my Remington 12 gauge in the other. The lamp on the side table cast a warm yellow pool of light, illuminating the steel and the wood, turning the weapon into a piece of art rather than a tool of destruction. I wasn't planning to use it. The firing pin was sitting in my pocket, and the shells were locked away in the garage safe. But Tiffany didn't know that. Tiffany only knew what she saw, and what she was about to see was the nightmare she had created, sitting in her living room, waiting for her. It had been 24 hours since the police dragged them out, 24 hours of peace. But I knew it wouldn't last. I knew her parents, people who lived in a trailer park in Indiana and thought their daughter was a princess, would sell their souls to get her out. I had heard from Tiny that they sold their Winnebago for cash this morning just to post her bond. She was coming. I could feel it, like a change in the weather. At 9 o'clock, the front door burst open, not with a key, but with a violent shove against the wood that I had forgotten to lock, intentionally. She stumbled in, bringing the cold night air and the smell of the county jail with her. She looked like a wreck. The expensive dress she had worn to my fake birthday party was wrinkled and stained with sweat and grime. Her blonde hair was matted on one side where she had slept on a concrete bench, and her makeup was smeared around her eyes, giving her the look of a deranged raccoon. But her eyes were bright, feverish, burning with a desperate manic energy. She didn't see me at first. Her focus was entirely on the wall behind the fireplace, the spot where the wall safe was hidden behind a painting of a ship at sea. She scrambled across the room, her heels clicking frantically on the hardwood. She was muttering to herself, a stream of curses and panic. Gotta get it, deed, cash, passports. She reached the painting and ripped it off the wall, throwing it carelessly onto the floor, the frame cracking. She spun the dial of the safe, her fingers shaking so hard she missed the combination twice. Damn it! Open, you stupid thing! She needed money. She needed the deed to the house. She needed to liquidate my life to save her own. She was a rat trying to chew through the hull of a sinking ship. I snapped the barrel of the shotgun back into place. The sound was loud, mechanical, and terrifying. A metallic clack, clack that echoed in the silent room. Tiffany froze, her hand hovering over the dial. She turned slowly, her movements jerky, like a puppet on tangled strings. She saw me sitting in the shadows, the gun resting across my knees, the rag dangling from my hand. You, she whispered, and the word was filled with a venom so pure it could kill. Hello, Tiffany, I said, my voice calm, conversational, like we were discussing the weather. You were supposed to be dead, she hissed, stepping away from the safe, her hands curling into claws. You were supposed to be in a home or in the ground. Plans change, I said, picking up the gun and sighting down the barrel, checking for dust, not aiming at her, just inspecting it. She stared at the weapon, and for a second fear flickered across her face. But then something else took over, a delusional arrogance, a belief that she could still talk her way out of this, that she could still win, because she was young and I was old, because she was white and I was black, because she was Tiffany and I was just Otis. She straightened up, smoothing her ruined dress, trying to summon the haughty queen who had ruled my house for 3 years. You think you have won, don't you? She said, walking toward me, her chin high, walking right into the line of fire. If the gun had been loaded, I didn't say anything. I just watched her, watched the gears turning in her desperate. Mind you haven't won anything, Otis, she spat, stopping a few feet away, getting into my personal space, trying to intimidate me with her presence. Marcus is going to talk. He is terrified. He is weak, and I have already told him what to say. I raised an eyebrow, urging her to continue. We are going to tell them the truth, she said, a twisted smile playing on her lips. The real truth, not your little fairy tale about brake lines and vitamins. We are going to tell them that you are the mastermind, Otis. I chuckled, a dry sound deep in my throat. The mastermind of what, Tiffany? My own murder? No, she said, her eyes gleaming. The mastermind of the drug ring. She pointed a finger at me, a finger that no longer wore the ring purchased with Viola's savings. That fentanyl wasn't ours, Otis. It was yours. Marcus is going to testify that you have been using his car to move product. He is going to say that you forced him to do it, that you threatened us, that you used your old trucking connections to run narcotics through the city. She laughed, a high-pitched sound that bordered on hysteria. Who were they going to believe? Otis, a young professional couple with no criminal record, or a senile old black man with a history of aggression and hidden offshore accounts? Oh yes, we know about the accounts now, the police told us. Big mistake. Otis having secret money makes you look guilty. It makes you look like a kingpin. We are going to flip the script. She continued pacing in front of me, her energy frantic, manic. We are going to say we were trying to get guardianship to stop you, to get you help, to get you off the streets, and you tried to kill us. You cut your own brakes to frame us. You staged the whole thing. She leaned down, getting right in my face, her breath smelling of stale coffee and fear. We are going to put you away, Otis, she whispered. We are going to put you in a federal prison where you will die, alone and unloved. And then we are going to take this house. We are going to take your money, and we are going to laugh about it on a beach in Mexico while you rot. It was a bold lie, a desperate lie, but I could see how she thought it would work. She was banking on the system. She was banking on prejudice. She was banking on the fact that the world loves a pretty crying woman more than it loves a silent old man. I looked at her, looking deep into her eyes, searching for a soul, but finding only a calculator. Are you finished? I asked quietly. She blinked, surprised by my lack of reaction. I said, Are you finished telling me your bedtime story? She stepped back, unsure. It is not a story, she snapped. It is what is going to happen. I set the shotgun down on the table with a heavy thud, the sound making her jump. "You know, Tiffany," I said, leaning forward, resting my elbows on my knees. "I have been doing some reading lately. While you were busy trying to kill me, I was busy looking at numbers." "Numbers?" she scoffed. "What numbers?" "Business numbers," I said. "Specifically, the books for a little place called Serenity Now." Her face went slack, the color draining out of her cheeks faster than water from a broken cup. Serenity Now. I continued watching her crumble that fancy spa you opened 2 years ago, the one you told Marcus was a gold mine, the one you said was breaking even and just needed a little more investment. She swallowed hard, her throat clicking. "How do you know about that?" she whispered. "I know everything, Tiffany," I said. "I know that you are renting a space in the Gold Coast that costs $10,000 a month. I know that you have 3 employees you haven't paid in 6 weeks. I know that you are leasing a Range Rover on the company card and writing it off as a business expense." I stood up slowly, towering over her. "And I know," I said, my voice dropping to a rumble, "that Serenity Now is losing exactly $8,000 a month." "No," she whimpered, shaking her head. "No, that is a lie. It is in the ledger, Tiffany," I said. "I have copies. I have the bank statements. You aren't a businesswoman. You are a leech. You have been bleeding Marcus dry for years, taking his salary, taking my money, taking loans in his name, all to keep that float, so you can play boss babe." She backed away until she hit the wall, her arrogance gone, replaced by the terrified realization that I had seen behind the curtain. "You have been stealing from the business to pay for your clothes," I said, stepping closer. "You have been skimming cash from the register to buy drugs, not just to plant on me, but for yourself. I saw the withdrawals, Tiffany. I saw the cash advances at the casino." She slid down the wall, crouching on the floor, her hands over her ears. "Stop it," she screamed. "Stop it." "You call me a drug lord?" I said, looking down at her with pity and disgust. "But you are just a junkie with a credit card terminal. You think Marcus is going to lie for you when he finds out you bankrupt him? You think he is going to go to prison for the woman who spent his inheritance on facials and bad bets?" "Marcus loves me," she sobbed, but it sounded weak. "Unconvinced Marcus loves money." I corrected her, "And you lost it all." I reached into my pocket and pulled out a piece of paper, a printout of a foreclosure notice. "This came today," I said, dropping it onto her lap. "It is for the spa. The landlord is locking you out on Monday. You are evicted. Tiffany, you are broke. You are homeless. And your parents just sold their house to bail you out of a crime you definitely committed." She looked at the paper, her hands shaking so hard she couldn't pick it up. "You have nothing," I said, my voice cold and final. "No business, no husband, no house, no leverage. You think you can threaten me with lies about drug rings?" I laughed, a harsh sound. "Go ahead, tell the police, tell them whatever you want, and then I will show them the books. I will show them the embezzlement. I will show them the fraud. I will show them that you are not a victim. You are a predator who ran out of prey." She looked up at me, tears streaming down her face, ruining the last of her facade. "Please," she whispered, "please, Otis, I have nowhere to go." I looked at the door she had walked through so arrogantly just minutes ago. "You have the street," I said. "Get out." She scrambled up, clutching the foreclosure notice to her chest like a shield. She looked at the safe. She looked at me. She looked at the gun on the table. She realized then that the game was truly over. She ran. She ran out the front door into the night, into a world that didn't care about her ambition or her lies. She ran toward a future that was as empty as her soul. I watched her go, watched the darkness swallow her up. I picked up the shotgun and broke it open, checking the empty chamber one last time. I sat back in the chair and listened to the silence of the house. It was over. The snake was gone. The grass was cut. But as I sat there alone in the pool of yellow light, I didn't feel triumphant. I just felt tired. Tired of the lies. Tired of the hate. Tired of having to be a monster to fight monsters. I closed my eyes and let the gun oil scent fill my nose. Tomorrow, I would deal with the lawyers. Tomorrow, I would deal with Marcus. But for tonight, I was just an old man sitting in his chair, guarding an empty fort, waiting for the dawn. The morning sun hitting the glass facade of the Dominion Tower was bright enough to blind a man, but my eyes were already wide open. They had been open since the moment I watched Tiffany run out of my house like the rat she was. I hadn't slept. I had just sat in my chair watching the dust motes dance in the light of dawn, thinking about the difference between cost and value. I walked into Franklin Vance's office at 9 a.m. sharp. The receptionist didn't ask my name. She just nodded and pressed a button under her desk. The heavy oak doors swung open, and Franklin was standing there waiting for me. He looked tired. His tie was loosened, and there were files spread across his desk like a paper graveyard. "Otis," he said, his voice low, respectful. "Come in." I sat in the leather chair, the same chair where I had read Viola's letter weeks ago. It felt like a lifetime had passed since then. I felt older, heavier, but also harder, like iron that had been forged in fire. "We need to talk about the numbers," Franklin said, sitting down and adjusting his glasses. He didn't offer me coffee. He knew I didn't want comfort. I wanted arithmetic. "Show me," I said. Franklin reached for a thick black binder, the one he kept in his personal safe, the one labeled simply, Jenkins Family Trust. He opened it, and the sound of the metal rings snapping apart echoed in the quiet room. "It is worse than we thought, Otis," he said, sliding a stack of spreadsheets across the polished wood. I looked at the columns of numbers, the dates, the amounts, the recipients. It was an autopsy of my son's financial life, a detailed record of a man who was bleeding money as fast as I could pump it in. "Let's start with the credit cards," Franklin said, pointing to the first page. I looked at the total at the bottom of the page, $215,000. $215,000 in 5 years. I ran my finger down the list of charges. It was a map of vanity and waste. $500 dinners at steakhouses, trips to Vegas, boutique hotels, designer clothes, cases of wine. It wasn't the spending of a man who was building a life. It was the spending of a man who was trying to fill a hole inside himself. "I paid all of this," I asked, my voice quiet. "You did," Franklin confirmed. "You set up the auto-pay on the Jenkins Logistics corporate account under employee retention expenses. Marcus never saw the bills. He just swiped the card and the magic money fairy made the debt disappear every month." I closed my eyes, remembering the times Marcus had bragged about his credit score, about his platinum status. He had walked around like a king, thinking he was a financial genius, thinking he had mastered the system. He didn't know he was standing on my shoulders. He didn't know I was the one holding him up, the one keeping him from drowning in his own greed. He called me a moocher, I whispered, opening my eyes. He stood in my kitchen and called me a useless old man while he was wearing a suit. I paid for eating food. I paid for living a life I subsidized. Franklin nodded, his expression grim. "There is more," he said, flipping the page. He pointed to a transaction from 2 years ago, a wire transfer for $85,000. "The car," he said. I looked at the entry. It was listed as a fleet vehicle purchase, but the VIN number didn't belong to a semi-truck. It belonged to a BMW 7 Series, the black sedan Marcus drove, the one he washed every Sunday, the one he wouldn't let me eat in because he said I would get crumbs on the leather. "He told me he got a bonus," I said, remembering the pride in his voice when he showed it to me. "He said the company valued him." "The company is you," Otis Franklin said gently. "You authorized the purchase through a shell company called Apex Holdings. Marcus thinks Apex is a venture capital firm that invests in top talent. He thinks he was headhunted. He thinks he earned that car." I laughed, a dry, bitter sound that hurt my throat. "He thinks he is a self-made man," I said. "He thinks he is a success story. He is a construct." Franklin said brutally, "He is a fiction. Otis, everything he has, every suit, every watch, every mile on that car is a lie. It is a stage set you built for him to play the big shot, and he tried to kill the stage manager," I said. I looked at the ledger again, looking at the total sum, looking at the hundreds of thousands of dollars I had poured into that boy. I had thought I was helping him. I had thought I was giving him the start I never had. I thought if I made his life easy, he would be happy. But I was wrong. I hadn't helped him. I had crippled him. I had taken away his struggle. I had taken away his need to work, to fight, to earn. I had created a soft, weak man who thought the world owed him a living, and when the world didn't deliver, he tried to murder the man who did. "This stops," I said, looking up at Franklin. "This stops today." Franklin nodded, reaching for a pen. "I have the paperwork ready, Otis," he said, pulling a document from a folder. It was a thick sheaf of papers with legal seals and bold headers. "This is a revocation of trust," he explained. "This dissolves the shell companies. This cancels the corporate cards. This calls in the loans." I looked at the document. Look at the words. Immediate effect. "What happens to the car?" I asked. "It is a company asset," Franklin said. "Legally, it belongs to Jenkins Logistics. Since Marcus is no longer an employee, and since he is currently incarcerated for a felony, we have the right to repossess it immediately." "Take it," I said. "Take it, today. I want it on a tow truck before noon." "And the cards?" Franklin asked. "Cancel them. Report them lost or stolen. Let the merchants decline him. Let him feel the shame of a declined transaction. Let him understand that the magic money fairy is dead. And the debts, the personal loans he took out using the company as a guarantor. We foreclose," Franklin said. "We call them in if he can't pay, and we know he can't. We seize his personal assets, what little he actually owns." "He owns nothing," I said. "He owns clothes and a few watches and a wife who is currently running from the law. Then he is bankrupt. Franklin said he will be destitute. Otis, he will come out of jail with nothing but the shirt on his back." "Good," I said. I picked up the pen. It was a heavy, expensive fountain pen, the kind of pen you use to sign treaties or death warrants. I thought about Marcus sitting in his cell right now, probably telling his cellmate about his rich lifestyle, probably still believing he was a victim, probably still waiting for Daddy to come save him. He needed to learn. He needed to learn the lesson I should have taught him when he was 10 years old. The lesson that you don't get to eat if you don't work. The lesson that respect is earned, not bought. I signed my name, Otis Jenkins, the letters sharp and jagged like barbed wire. I signed the revocation for the car. I signed the cancellation for the cards. I signed the foreclosure on the loans. With every signature, I felt a weight lifting off my chest. A weight I hadn't realized I was carrying, the weight of his expectations, the weight of his entitlement, the weight of his failure. It wasn't my failure anymore. I handed the pen back to Franklin. "It is done," I said. Franklin looked at the papers, then at me. "Are you sure, Otis?" he asked, one last time. "This is the nuclear option. There is no coming back from this. Once we execute these orders, his life as he knows it is over." "His life as he knows it was a lie," I said, standing up. "I am just turning on the lights, Franklin. I am just showing him the real world." Franklin nodded, pressing a button on his intercom. "Send in the notary," he said. We spent the next hour formalizing the destruction of my son's fantasy. I watched the notary stamp the papers, the heavy thud of the embosser sounding like the closing of a prison door. When we were finished, Franklin walked me to the door. "What are you going to do now, Otis?" he asked. "I am going to work," I said, adjusting my hat. "I am going to the office." "To the office?" Franklin asked, surprised. "You haven't been to the headquarters in a year." "I have a rat to catch," I said. "A big rat who thinks he owns the place." I walked out of the Dominion Tower and into the sunlight. The city looked different today. It looked sharper, clearer. The fog of grief and confusion had lifted. I walked to my truck, the rental I had picked up after Marcus destroyed my Ford. It wasn't the same, but it would do. I climbed in and started the engine. I thought about the money. $215,000, $85,000, nearly $350,000, wasted on a man who hated me. It hurt. It hurt like hell to know that my love had been monetized, that my affection had been converted into currency. But the bank was closed now. The vault was locked. I pulled out into traffic, merging with the flow of trucks and cars heading toward the industrial district, heading toward Jenkins Logistics. Marcus had told his friends he was the boss. He had told his wife he was the heir. He had told the world he was a success. Today he was going to find out that he was just a trespasser, and the landlord was coming to serve the eviction notice. The bail bondsman had taken the last of Marcus's hidden cash, a stash he had squirreled away in a hollowed-out book in his office, but it was enough to buy him 24 hours of freedom, 24 hours to destroy the evidence, 24 hours to wipe the servers and shred the paper trail that linked him to the embezzlement scheme he called his retirement plan. I knew he would come back to the scene of the crime. Criminals always do, especially the desperate ones who think they are smarter than the system. I was counting on it. I sat in the back of the town car, tinted windows, rolling up the collar of my bespoke Italian suit, adjusting the silk tie that felt strange after years of flannel and denim. I looked at my reflection in the glass, and I didn't see the retired truck driver. I didn't see the confused old man who wet himself in the hallway. I saw the chairman. I saw the man who had built an empire from asphalt and grit. We were parked across the street from the headquarters of Jenkins Logistics, the building rising like a glass monolith against the gray Chicago sky. I watched as a taxi pulled up to the side entrance, the one used by employees who didn't want to be seen. Marcus stepped out. He looked terrible. His designer suit was rumpled, his hair was a mess, and he kept looking over his shoulder, twitching at every shadow. He looked like a man who was running out of time and running out of road. He swiped his keycard at the door, a card I had instructed Henderson to leave active just for this moment. The light turned green, and he slipped inside, disappearing into the belly of the beast. "It is time," I said to the driver. The car pulled around to the main entrance, gliding to a stop right in front of the revolving doors. The security guard, a man named Johnson, who had worked for me for 15 years, stepped out and opened the rear door. His back straight, his salute crisp. "Good morning, Mr. Jenkins," Johnson said, his voice booming with respect. "Good morning, Johnson," I said, stepping out onto the pavement, buttoning my jacket. "I trust everything is in position." "Yes, sir. He is on the 4th floor, executive wing, just like you said. Henderson is waiting." I walked into the lobby and the air changed instantly. The hum of conversation died down, replaced by a hush of reverence. Secretaries stopped typing. Junior executives stopped walking. Everyone turned to look at the man in the black suit, the man they rarely saw, but whose signature was on every check they cashed. I didn't shuffle today. I didn't drag my leg. I walked with the heavy, inevitable momentum of a freight train. I nodded to the staff, acknowledging them, letting them see the face of the owner, letting them see that the rumors of my decline were greatly exaggerated. I took the private elevator to the 4th floor, the one that required a biometric scan, the one Marcus didn't even know existed because he thought he was just a mid-level manager in a nameless conglomerate. He thought Jenkins was just a common name. He thought his hiring was a coincidence, a stroke of luck. The elevator doors slid open, revealing the executive suite, a long corridor of plush carpet, and mahogany doors at the end of the hall was the boardroom, and next to it, the office Marcus had been using, the office where he played the big shot. I could hear the sound of a shredder running, a mechanical grinding noise that sounded like panic. I walked down the hall, flanked by Henderson, my CEO, and 2 large security officers. I didn't knock. I pushed the door open and stepped inside. Marcus was frantic. He was shoving handfuls of paper into the shredder, his laptop open on the desk, a progress bar on the screen showing a file deletion in progress. He was sweating, muttering to himself, so focused on his destruction that he didn't hear us enter. "Marcus," I said, my voice filling the room. He jumped, spinning around, dropping a stack of invoices onto the floor. "Who is there?" he shouted, his eyes wide and wild. "Get out, I am busy." Then he saw me. He froze, his mouth opening and closing like a fish on a hook. He looked at the suit. He looked at the shoes. He looked at the way Henderson was standing a step behind me, deferential and submissive. "Dad," he whispered, his voice trembling with confusion. "What are you doing here? How did you get in here?" "Security. Security works for me, Marcus," I said, walking past him, walking around the large oak desk, walking to the high-back leather chair that sat in front of the window, overlooking the city. I sat down. The chair creaked comfortably, accepting my weight, a throne reclaiming its king. Marcus stared at me, his brain trying to process the image, trying to reconcile the senile old man in the flannel shirt with the titan sitting in the power seat. "You can't sit there," he stammered. "That is the chairman's chair. Dad, get up. You are going to get us in trouble." "I am the chairman, Marcus," I said, resting my hands on the desk. Marcus laughed, a high-pitched, hysterical sound that bordered on madness. "What are you talking about? You are a truck driver, Dad. You drove routes, you have a bad back and a pension. You are confused again. You need to go home." "Henderson, step forward." I commanded my CEO. Stepped up, placing a file on the desk. "Tell him, Henderson, tell him who signs your checks." Henderson looked at Marcus with a mixture of pity and contempt. "Mr. Jenkins is the sole proprietor and founder of Jenkins Logistics," Marcus Henderson said, his voice dry and factual. He owns 51% of the voting stock and 100% of the private equity. You work for him, Marcus. You have always worked for him." Marcus shook his head, backing away until he hit the shredder. "No," he whispered. "No, that is impossible. He is broke. He lives in that old house. He drives that old truck." "I lived in that house because it was a home," I said, standing up, leaning over the desk, my shadow falling over him. "I drove that truck because it reminded me of the work, of the sweat, of the miles I drove to put food on your table." I looked at the shredder. I looked at the laptop. "You thought I was poor," I said, my voice dropping to a dangerous growl. "So you decided to steal. You thought I was weak, so you decided to kill me." "I didn't steal," Marcus cried, pointing at the laptop. "I earned this. I brought in the red line deal. I made this company money. You sold us out," I roared, slamming my hand on the desk, making him jump. "You were selling client lists to our competitors. You were invoicing for phantom repairs. You were bleeding this company dry to pay for your gambling and your wife's vanity." I picked up the file Henderson had laid down, flipping it open. $200,000, Marcus, I said, reading the number off the forensic audit. $200,000 embezzled in 18 months. I tossed the file at him, the papers fluttering to the floor around his feet like dead leaves. "But here is the joke, son. Here is the punchline that is going to keep you awake in your cell for the next 10 years. I walked around the desk, closing the distance between us, until I was standing right in front of him, until I could smell the fear coming off him in waves. "You stole $200,000 from the company," I said, my voice quiet, intense. "But you didn't know you were stealing your own inheritance." Marcus looked up at me, his eyes filling with tears, his face crumbling. "What?" he gasped. "This was all yours," I said, spreading my arms, encompassing the office, the building, the fleet, the empire, all of it. Jenkins Logistics, the $50 million in assets, the legacy, the power. It was all going to be yours, Marcus. It was in the trust. It was in the will. I was building this for you. I was holding it for you, waiting for you to grow up, waiting for you to become a man. I let that sink in. I let him feel the weight of what he had lost. I let him realize that he had burned down his own castle just to steal the copper wiring from the walls. "You were stealing from your own pocket," I said, shaking my head in disgust. "You were robbing your own future. If you had just waited, if you had just been honest, if you had just been a decent human being, you would have had everything." Marcus fell to his knees, sobbing, clutching at my pant leg. "Dad, I didn't know," he wailed. "Please, I didn't know. Give me another chance. I can fix it. I can run the company. I can be better." I looked down at him, looking at the son who had tried to smother me with a pillow, looking at the employee who had sold my secrets. "You can't fix this, Marcus," I said, pulling my leg away, stepping back out of his reach. "You aren't a businessman. You are a thief. And you aren't a son. You are a stranger." I looked at Henderson Security, I said. 2 guards stepped forward, grabbing Marcus by the arms, hauling him up from the floor. He hung there, limp, broken, his expensive suit ruined, his life in tatters. "You are fired, Marcus," I said, my voice cold, final. "And you are disowned. Get him out of my building." They dragged him out, kicking and screaming, his wails echoing down the hallway, passing the photos of the trucks, passing the history he had spat on. I stood in the silence of the office, listening to the shredder still humming in the corner. I walked over and pulled the plug, silencing the machine. I walked to the window and looked out at the yard, where the trucks were lining up, ready to carry their loads across the country. I was 75 years old. I was alone. I had just sent my only child to prison. But as I looked at the name Jenkins, painted on the side of a trailer, shining in the sun, I felt a strange sense of peace. The rot was gone. The infection was cut out. I sat back down in the chairman's chair and picked up the phone. "Henderson?" I said. "Yes, sir. Get the legal team in here. We have a company to save." And Henderson, "Yes, sir. Order some new furniture for this office. Something classic. Something that lasts. I am going to be here for a while." The courtroom was cold and sterile, smelling of old wood and finality. I sat in the front row, my hands resting on my cane, not because I needed it anymore, but because it felt good to have something solid to hold on to. The trial had been a long, grueling parade of evidence. The recordings of Viola's last moments played for a silent jury. The forensic accounting of my stolen wealth displayed on screens. The testimony of the mechanic who found the cut brake lines. But today was the end. Today was the reckoning. Marcus and Tiffany stood before the judge wearing orange jumpsuits that washed out their complexions, making them look like ghosts of the people they used to be. Tiffany was weeping, soft, theatrical sobs that no longer moved anyone. Marcus just stared at the floor, his shoulders slumped, a man whose spine had been removed, along with his credit cards. The judge, a gray-haired man with eyes that had seen too much evil, adjusted his glasses and looked down at them. In the matter of the death of Viola Jenkins and the attempted murder of Otis Jenkins, the jury has found the defendants guilty on all counts, he said, his voice echoing in the hush. Guilty. The word hung in the air like smoke. For the murder of Viola Jenkins and the conspiracy to commit murder against Otis Jenkins, combined with multiple counts of grand larceny and fraud, I sentence you both to life in prison without the possibility of parole for 25 years. Tiffany let out a wail that sounded like a wounded animal, her legs giving out as the bailiffs grabbed her. She turned to look at me, her eyes wild with hate and fear. "You did this," she screamed. "You ruined us." I didn't blink. I didn't look away. I just watched as they dragged her out, her heels dragging on the floor, her ambition finally leading her to a cage. Then they came for Marcus. He didn't scream, he didn't fight. He just looked at me, his eyes empty and wet. "Dad," he whispered. I looked at him. I looked at the baby I had held, the boy I had taught to fish, the man who had tried to smother me with a pillow. I didn't say anything. I just nodded, a slow, final acknowledgement of the end. They took him away, the heavy door slamming shut, sealing him in a concrete box, sealing me in a life without a son. I walked out of the courthouse into the bright afternoon sun. The air tasted sweet. It tasted like freedom. I drove my truck to the cemetery, the one on the hill where the oak trees stood guard over the silent stones. I parked and walked up the path, carrying a bouquet of white lilies, Viola's favorite. Her headstone was simple and elegant, just like she was. Viola Jenkins, beloved wife, mother, and the date. I knelt down and placed the flowers on the grass, tracing her name with my finger. "We got him, Vi," I whispered into the wind. "Justice is done." I stayed there for a long time, watching the shadows lengthen across the grass. I thought about the empty house waiting for me. I thought about the company waiting for my command. I thought about the silence that would greet me when I unlocked the door. For a moment, the grief washed over me, a heavy tide of sadness, not for Marcus, but for the loss of the dream. I mourned the family we could have been. I mourned the grandchildren I would never know. I mourned the wasted love I had poured into a vessel that was cracked and leaking. But then I remembered the pillow. I remembered the brakes. I remembered the diary. I stood up, my knees popping, my back straightening. It was a hard thing to cut your own flesh, I thought, to sever the limb that is rotting, to save the body. But it was necessary. Marcus was a tumor, a sickness that had taken root in my life, feeding on my success, feeding on my love, until there was nothing left but poison. I had to cut him out. I had to cauterize the wound. It hurt. It hurt like hell. But as I stood there in the quiet cemetery, I realized that the pain was healing. It was the clean pain of surgery, not the throbbing ache of infection. I wasn't alone. I had Viola in my heart. I had the respect of my employees I had, the city I had built, and I had a new purpose. I touched the headstone one last time. I am starting a foundation. Vi, I said aloud, the Viola Jenkins Foundation for Elder Protection. I am going to use the money they tried to steal to help other old folks who are being abused by their families. I am going to make sure no one else has to sleep with a gun under their pillow. I turned and walked back to my truck, my step lighter, my head high. I was 75 years old. I was a widower. I was childless, but I was alive. I climbed into the cab and started the engine. The diesel rumble, a comforting heartbeat. I put the truck in gear and drove away from the graves, driving toward the skyline, driving toward the future. I had a company to run. I had a legacy to build. And for the first time in 3 years, I wasn't just surviving. I was living. Greed is a blindfold that leads you off a cliff, but ingratitude is the shove that sends you over. Otis taught us that a parent's love is a shield, not a weapon to be used against them. When children view their inheritance as a right, rather than a privilege, they forfeit both. The poison wasn't just in the pills, it was in the hearts of those who should have protected him. In the end, you cannot inherit what you tried to destroy. True wealth isn't the millions in the bank. It is the peace of mind knowing you raised yourself up without tearing others down. Respect your elders, or prepare to be schooled by their survival instincts. Otis Jenkins teaches us that the most dangerous person in the room is often the one listening, not the one shouting. Marcus and Tiffany made the fatal error of confusing kindness with blindness. They assumed that because Otis was old, he was obsolete, forgetting that wisdom is accumulated through survival, not just age. They tried to hustle a man who had spent his life negotiating with steel and concrete. This story stands as a testament that you should never bite the hand that feeds you, because that same hand has the power to cut off the supply. In the end, the weight of their own lies crushed them, proving that while you can inherit money, you cannot steal respect. Do you think Otis went too far by sending his own son to prison for life? Or was it the only way to get justice for Viola? Let me know in the comments below if you would have forgiven Marcus or destroyed him. Don't forget to hit the like button and subscribe for more stories where the underdog finally bites back.